Thomas and Frederick. With Thomas and Frederick. With Thomas and Frederick.
Welcome to State of the Franchise, the podcast that talks about franchises of all shapes, sizes, backgrounds, genres, and types. I am one of your hosts, Tom Stedler, here with I was going to say the Lord of the Rings, but that kind of already ruins the bit.
We are off.
We'll call him the Great Gray Wizard of the Eastern Wisconsin shores. Red bacon.
You shall not pass.
Damn it! No.
It's good to be here, Tom. I'm excited to talk to you again, to go on another adventure.
We're gonna go there and back again, Fred. I believe is the proper context and reference for this.
And I haven't been shaving my feet.
Oh, I was just gonna say, you had some pretty Hobbit feet, but I thought maybe they were those fake prosthetic ones that they wear in the movies.
No, this is years of the making. I can't grow a beard, but I've got feet beards.
Maybe that's just the Tolkien in you. And of course, we're gonna be talking about Tolkien. We're doing Tolkien talk, but and this week, as we're following up from, I guess, a couple different episodes, Fred, because it was a couple of years ago we actually did our Lord of the Rings episode. And then just recently, and in terms of the context of when you'd be listening to this podcast, if you're listening episodically, we also did a episode on Rankin Bass movies where we did talk about the Hobbit Rankin Bass movie. But Fred, lest we leave everyone in the lurch, I think we should introduce our special guest for this week.
It's definitely a special guest. We've been planning this for a while. He came to us with a topic, I'm pretty sure. I don't think we told him Hobbit. We are here with CJ Guzan.
See, it's now it became Guzan. Goo is in sticky, Guzan is in van.
Guzan.
Yes. There we go. I don't blame anybody.
Well, this always happens when we start recording, and then it gets to that point where we're like, damn, we should have asked before. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here. I'm not going to do it again. You have enough times.
Hi, everyone.
CJ.
Hello. Welcome to my guest spot. Hi.
Yeah.
I'm glad I could be here. No, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Fred. Thank you for trying. That's what's really important. One time a telemarketer actually said, Fuzan. I don't know where they got that from, but even in my young, I was 9 and I was like, yeah, boop. Clearly the wrong name. So don't worry about it. No, it's one of those names.
Well, thanks for joining the show, CJ. We're very excited to have you on this week, as you are a Tolkien head of sorts.
Yes, absolutely. I have been a fan of Tolkien since 1999, I believe it was, right when the Fellowship of the Ring came out, and I knew nothing. I knew absolutely nothing about it, and it was actually my last day of summer vacation before I had to go back to school the next day, and I was working with my dad all summer because we were landscaping, hardscaping, just doing all kinds of outdoor work. And at the end of the day, my dad was basically like, you know what? Let's go see it. And I had only been seeing Frodo's image on Burger King collector's cups. And I was like, what is it? I don't know. And then all of a sudden we're in the theater, and it was just right off the bat, from the moment I was just like, this is just joyous as a kid. And then slowly and steadily, right, the riders coming down the road, it gets really scary. You get to Moria and you're like, oh my goodness. It was otherworldly, and I have been in deep ever since. I've absolutely loved it.
Wow. So that's kind of crazy. So you had never read The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings prior to the movies coming out?
Nope. Never heard of it. Never saw it. Probably recognized a reference in a Led Zeppelin song up to that point, and that was about it. It was just like, oh, it wasn't even on my radar. It wasn't even a thing that was ever discussed or even in the distance. It was just all of a sudden, boom, the movie is here. And that was all it took, was just seeing that first movie. And that was enough. Every other one after that was, I am going to see this. And I didn't even actually read any of the books until 3.5 years ago.
Wow.
And I was always a huge fan of it. But then I was like, what am I doing? There's probably way more. Boy, was I right.
Yeah.
I think it started with the Silmarillion. I was like, I'm gonna go for gold.
Wow.
I'm gonna go way up there. And boy, was that a mistake. But it did pay off in the end, because then you had all that, the background, the full breadth of the world that Tolkien, both Senior and Christopher, created pretty much together. Gotta give Christopher credit, because he genuinely is the reason why we have pretty much all of it based on, like, it was just The Hobbit though, which is important to note. The Hobbit, that was all J.R.R., but the all the rest of it, that's pretty much Christopher Tolkien.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. I guess I am not familiar with the dynamics. I mean, Christopher Tolkien comes up a lot in like the history and the development, especially later on with when, you know, he's starting to talk about like publishing rights or getting the rights to make a movie or whatever. So I think that's what I've never quite understood, is what exactly his dynamic was, or if he was just sort of entrusted with the whole estate and like, you kind of have the keys to the franchise here and now you take it and go.
Yeah, it was. Well, let me be much more clear about it. Is that The Hobbit, the book itself, as well as then all of the story that was surrounding the approach that J.R.R. was taking to starting the Lord of the Rings, all of that was him, and then the Lord of the Rings himself, also him. But as soon as you then get past that, all of the things that eventually became published and known to the world that really got people into that, addicted to this fantasy world, and also then all of the people who have since become prolific writers and creators based on that idea that, whoa, this is possible, that all started with Tolkien, but all the rest of it was Christopher, who at the time when The Lord of the Rings was being actually written, when he was in England during the Blitz and whatnot, as soon as that was all done, Christopher was able to take over because he was a fighter pilot in South Africa at the time.
Oh, wow.
So he was defending the empire, as it were, down there, and then was able to come back. And by that point, it was really weird. It was kind of a slow burn. Not The Hobbit though. That was surprisingly quick, and because it was also a children's story.
Right.
Right.
And it's significantly less dense.
Much less dense. And I mean, really, not even, oh gosh, J.K. Rowling has a real skill for reversing her like story so that she can make sense of things and that it can all kind of plug in, because it's not really planned. But J.R.R. was one of those ones where it was like, I gotta figure out why they did all that stuff.
Yeah.
And he really did. Like, he went back all the way. And that's one of the things that I love about the story so much. The breadth of the ancient backdrop, and that history, and the fact that it goes way beyond what you can see and feel is one of my favorite parts, because it's mysterious.
Yeah.
They don't show the monster. You know, it's there.
It's true.
It's been banished.
I'm very interested to get your guys' take, because obviously we're going to be hyper focusing in on Hobbit today. And I mean, but I think you cannot, and just what you were saying right there, you cannot talk about the Hobbit without also talking about the Lord of the Rings, the Silmarillion, because the events that came before and the events that come after inform so much about the story, even if it was kind of retrofitted in the grand scheme of things by Tolkien himself. But it's definitely something that you look at it, it's like, well, what a simple story. But then it's like, aha, but there's reasons why, you know, Gollum was so precious about his ring, right? Yeah, no, I mean, that's pretty interesting, though, that you were, I would say, with relativity to the time frame we're in now, fairly recently getting into the books, but I think, yeah, but now you're talking 25 years ago now is when the movies were announced, so we found some time. But Fred, what about you in terms of The Hobbit? I know you had talked a little bit about your Lord of the Rings exposure, but what was like the first memory you have of like The Hobbit?
Well, what I wish I would have done some research on before we started was, is there and I'm sure there was, a audio drama of The Hobbit like there was for Lord of the Rings? Because that, which I'll just repeat, for my knowledge of anything Tolkien, was being in the car going to swim practice. My dad had recorded cassettes of like the British radio drama, which actually had Ian Holm, I think, playing Samwise. I think we talked about it on an episode. Either way, I would assume that's where I first saw it, or the Rankin Bass, because when I went and saw the Fellowship of the Ring, I had the Fellowship, the Ralph Bakshi movie, like on VHS, and I had seen it 100 times. I knew the story. I hadn't read the books yet. I think I read them in like during the release of the movies, but it was definitely the animated movies and those audio plays for both. And I just remember it like, and we'll talk about this, just blowing my mind and confusing me that the Hobbit book or the Hobbit animated movie and the Return of the King animated movie look the same, but the middle part doesn't, and I don't get it. And when I get older, when you're older, you realize, made by different people,
Right?
But it's still, it made me mad as like a little kid. I was like, this doesn't make sense. But I remember the music from the Hobbit, the Rankin Bass, like the greatest adventure, just like that kind of singing.
That was good.
I don't know, like that's like that folksy like singing where they like make their throat trill.
Very
Mhm.
And that song, he's just like letting that trill rip throughout the whole thing.
Oh yeah.
And I just liked it. And I also remember going through high school, and I grew up in like a southern I'm trying to think how to describe, like suburb where it was a lot of like hippie kids. So then it became like The Hobbit was something you'd see on like a poster, like in a basement.
Yeah.
And a lot of talk of Led Zeppelin, there was that time. And then later, I just it just became like the movies. And then The Hobbit, when Peter Jackson came out, I remember getting really excited for that. And then I think I'm going to save the rest, but I'm just saying then things kind of turned. But I've come back around.
Yeah.
I think I really love The Hobbit for what it is, even with, I like seeing it as the simple story. And I do like thinking about the grander, like kind of the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern of what's going on around the story that's on the epic level of Lord of the Rings. But then there is kind of the small, sweet kind of kid story that works.
Yeah. And I did want to confirm that, yes, they did do a radio broadcast. It was an 8-part radio drama back in 1968. BBC Radio had done this. So you probably did listen to a lot of those on those tapes.
Yeah, I feel like I really distinctly remember hearing like the Bilbo Gollum like scenes, which were like, those audio dramas would get kind of freaky when they were dealing with characters like Gollum. People really going for the voices. And so I feel like I really remember that. That and when Sam stabs the spider in Return of the King, I think are two moments I remember being in the back of the car like, whoa, this is cool.
Man, it is a pretty wild story. And I definitely am curious to get really into the weeds with like some of the story beats, which and we'll kind of talk about it too, of how they managed to extrapolate that into 3 movies in live action. Whereas you have the Rankin Bass animated movie that's an hour and 20. And I saved this. I didn't tell you guys. I watched it for the first time ever last night.
Nice.
Yes. So up until now, up until last night, I had never seen the Rankin Bass, but I was so curious after we did our Rankin Bass episode and Fred talked it up so much. I was like, I got to see what this is about. And the trill vocal, the soundtrack is incredible.
It is. And it's the guy who does the voice of Bilbo.
Yes.
Right? What was his name? I can't remember.
The gentleman that played Bilbo.
Yeah, because he was like also the musician. I'm pretty sure he was also the guitarist.
Something Preminger.
Orson Bean.
Orson Bean.
Orson?
I know Otto Preminger is a voice in the cast because I saw that name today and I was like, recognize that name.
Yeah, he is.
Might be Gandalf or something.
He is the Elven King, who not necessarily Elrond, right? Because
that was a fun part of the movie for me.
Yes.
It is true. That is, if there's any word that describes the Rankin Bass Hobbit, it is expedited. Is because it was so like, I loved it though because of the fact that without all of the, I think that I saw the animated one and read the book at the right time after all of the other world was kind of built for me in my mind. I actually kind of knew it because the animated one as a children's story really works. And it's not so infantilized, right? It's not it's a good like classic fairy tale to the degree of not quite like the German, they'll eat your children, but in a way the threat is there. And that's really what they were looking for. And I thought that that's probably what kind of kept its longevity as a thing, is that people still can appreciate it because there were actual stakes. It was not topical. And also one of my favorite things about Tolkien, nothing is allegory. Nothing is just some big like comparison to the world that he's living in. He's just being like, no, this is cool. And I love that. And he explicitly says that because he knew that people were going to start to draw their own comparisons and that could go wild.
Yeah. And I think, do you guys see The Hobbit as a standalone piece, like, does it still stand up as just like solely this children's story? But it has some, I guess, some inherent darker themes, right? I mean, even like I had forgotten the ending of The Hobbit, of like the amount of people that die. And I'm like, whoa, okay, hold on. And like I had seen all the live action movies in the theaters. I think those were the first and last times I saw those. We can talk about that later on. But I didn't remember a lot of the ending beats. I just kind of always was like, okay, yep, they go, they fight, and then Bilbo and Gandalf go back to the Shire, and then we just kind of wait till Lord of the Rings to happen, right? But like the fallout of the Battle of the Five Armies, I am like, oh God, like Thorin dies like that. What?
Mm-hmm.
It's that completely got memory hold for me. Which, and then I'm like, but I guess getting back to the original prompt here, and what I want you guys to kind of dive into is like knowing that so many people take Lord of the Rings so seriously. It's kind of this dark, almost like adult fantasy now. Like it's so rarely thought of as for children. But The Hobbit is not that same way, I think, in the way it was conceived. Do you think it still holds that way, or do you think it has inherited a lot of what Lord of the Rings is about?
Both. I think it has both. I think it has this weird duality about its life from its conception to now that both tracks have continued. The original is still going. It is still a children's story. It is still something that people will read at pretty much any age. As soon as you can read, and you can read it, you can digest it. It is playful. It is fun. It is genuinely one of those things that anyone can sink their teeth into. It's also adult. I've just read it for the first time a couple of years ago, and I very much loved it as an adult. But I did have all that background, so it's almost like it's gotten a second life. So the second track, it's almost like how Star Wars is also like both a children's movie at times, but then also has like all of a sudden now we have Rogue One and Andor that are yet again bringing back that term of de-infantilized. It's not a baby thing or for kids. It's quite literally like, no, it's serious stuff. Like it has war in the title, you know. But but when it comes to this, I feel like it's both of those tracks exist and both of them have enough credit to continue in that way.
Right.
And yeah, I can't say enough about staying away from topical subjects as a writer. That makes all the difference. Is as soon as you get away from topical and you just go for something that is a very basic and ancient and carried through time theme, like the same thing happened with Star Wars, just as that thematic comparison, is that it was like they were looking at Beowulf, they were looking at all of those and those classics. The same
Joseph
thing with
Campbell.
They were looking at all those themes, and they were and for Tolkien, he wanted to do something that was very much sticking to who can we all root for, and what has worked in the past, and it wasn't so much for the sake of like, yes, then I'll get the money, but it was more like, well, at least now I know that this will work because it follows a very generally same path as all of those tales that do have longevity and people do want to add to and really learn more about.
Yeah. And it's curious. Sorry, Fred, I was going to cut you
No,
off.
go ahead. I didn't have anything to say except to let people know I know who Joseph Campbell is. I'm aware of the hero's journey.
Yes.
Yeah, he was a singer. Yeah, he was in the Wrecking Crew. Yeah.
Is that actually a name of the singer? Is that?
That's Glenn Campbell.
Oh, okay. I'm like, wait a minute.
I was like, I don't get it, but it might be a dad band.
Yeah.
And Tom might get it.
I don't know. I'm not
dad rock.
I'm not as familiar with the Wrecking Crew.
Okay.
But I am. I'll take your word for it.
You've heard them. They've been on everything.
But when it comes to, I can't think of the House of Shambhala, we got expert over here.
Oh, Three Dog Night. Yeah. Let's not get into Three Dog Night. Not the episode. I don't want to be doing soundbite drops throughout the whole thing. But
Well, I will say real quick, last night I had a 2-dog night. I had 2 hot dogs.
Oh, nice.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't brag on this podcast.
Were they Costco dogs?
No, it was at a children's party. They were nice and boiled. It was good.
Okay.
Oh.
Like my hot dogs, nice and boiled.
Boiled hot dogs.
Fred had a 2 glizzy nights.
Yeah.
The kids are now saying. That would be the modern name of the band. It would be 3 glizzy nights. It would be like, and it kind of ages a little bit better than 3 Dog Night. Because you're like, what does that mean? It's such a staple of the time, you know?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I don't know. But I mean, I wasn't going to add too much more than it is just interesting to see the development. And like you were just talking about the influences even of like what The Hobbit had informed, and like Dungeons and Dragons is obviously the biggest thing. And I think you talk about that 40 years ago, as we kind of see in Stranger Things, it's a kid's game, right? It's for kids. Now there's podcasts about Dungeons and Dragons. There's like live like events about Dungeons and Dragons. There's shows, there's movies. It's for like adults because all those people grew up. And now you have like grown adults playing that, and it's no longer just a kids thing. So that's why I'm always kind of curious when I come to The Hobbit. I'm like, at its core, it still feels like a children's story, but again, it's so intricately tied, which of course to Lord of the Rings, and that it just there's this theme that kind of chances that. But I think you talking about Star Wars definitely is the right way to view it. It's like it's for kids. It can be still for kids, but yeah, there's definitely more to it.
I would say I agree with you guys on that. And the only issue, and it's just kind of like a perspective thing and how important movies are to you. And I'll open the subject and close it and pin it real quick. I feel it is hard for me at times to keep them separated. To quote my favorite band, The Offspring, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, because the Hobbit movies are like making it direct sequels. The live action ones do.
Right.
They add that stuff in, which is the only reason why sometimes I do have trouble separating like the playful child story, The Hobbit today versus like Lord of the Rings, which, you know, we'll talk about. That's why I love the animated movie, because I can get that sort of quick, you know, fairy tale vibe, you know, kid story vibe that I love.
Yeah. Well, and there is, and we'll get into this when we start getting into our history too, but there even was a little bit of rewriting on Tolkien's part to retrofit some pieces of The Hobbit to fit the narrative of The Lord of the Rings, so that, especially concerning the One Ring and making all that kind of like make sense of like, why was this not such a big deal when Bilbo was throwing it on willy-nilly? And now all of a sudden, every time Frodo throws it on, it's like, yeah, there's ring wraiths coming after you, right? But I guess maybe we should talk through the actual story beats so people understand where the start and the stop is for The Hobbit. I don't know. CJ, do you want to give your take at retelling all the story beats? Otherwise, I have it here.
Sure, I can try. Let's see. The quickest way to summarize Proust competition. So let's summarize The Hobbit. So Gandalf needs to do a job. And that job, we won't go into the Lord of the Rings stuff. We'll completely ignore that and we'll just do Hobbit. Okay, so Gandalf is getting a crew together in order to take back Erebor, which is the ancient dwarf kingdom in, I believe, the north, just to the northeast of the Misty Mountains.
Yeah. I don't want to interrupt you, but I just love the way you started this. Makes it sound a lot like Ocean's 11.
Very simple. Very straight.
Like
The format works.
I need 14 guys to hold this job.
He does. And so he gets everybody together. The crew is, they all show up at Bilbo's house. Bilbo does not know any of this except for the fact that he was familiar with Gandalf as a child, because Gandalf always goes to the Shire to clear his mind and build fireworks and launch them for people whenever. Not often, but when he does, everybody loves it and everyone remembers it. But he, just kind of naively goes through his life, and then he shows up again and he is enlisted into the company. Along with Bilbo and Gandalf are Balin, Dwalin, Dori, Ori, Nori, Keely, Feely, Oin, Gloin, Biffer, Bofer, Bomber, and then Thorin.
That's impressive.
And Thorin is the king. He is the dethroned king of Erebor, although it was really the reason why he was dethroned is because they lost their kingdom to a dragon, and the dragon was Smaug, who was an evil fire drake from the north. So the fire drake lives in the dragon's hold of Erebor, which was their kingdom, and so they have to make their way from the Shire, which is really far away, all the way across mountains and woods and plains and a lot of uneventful territory, but then a lot of even more eventful territory, as they basically have the issue of, how do we take it back? Why are we taking it back? Who's trying to stop us? And when they finally get there, the dragon gets out. It tries to,
Whoops.
Yeah, whoops. It kills a lot of people in a nearby floating town of Dale. Dale is not Dale. I'm sorry. The Lake Town and Lake Town had Asgaroth is what Lake Town used to be called. There was an ancient name for it. But they basically then have to go in, and the dragon is killed by the humans. But they learn about that later. And as they are then holed up in the mountain, everybody realizes that the dragon is dead. So the main deterrent to people stealing the massive, earth-changing treasure that exists within this massive mountain that's hollowed out as a dwarven kingdom is gone. So everybody comes for their share or their take, and some of them deserve it, but dwarves are not known for being generous or otherwise working with anyone on anything. They tend to, even if they have been in the past, if they have been like, commissioned to make something for someone and they've been paid the money to make it for them, but they really like what they made, they'll just keep it and be like, but you didn't do it. And that's literally why the elves and the dwarves tend to hate each other every once in a while, is because they've done that. They've made stuff for the elves. And so by the end of the story, Smaug is not even the biggest problem. The biggest problem is there are now 5 separate armies fighting for this massive kingdom, except for the fact that they were fighting each other first, and then a bunch of goblins get involved. That's in the book, and goblins are technically orcs. So that's another thing, is that there's a differentiation, but they're just different types of orcs. But as far as the book is concerned, he uses goblin and orc interchangeably. So that's pretty much it. So then by the end, a bunch of them die, which is a big surprise. A bunch of the company die. I know Keely and Feely, Thorin, some of the other... Oin dies way later. That's a whole nother thing. We can get into that another time. But it was... So a bunch of them die. Gandalf's like, sorry about that, but you did it. And so then so Gandalf and Bilbo then head back to all the way back to the Shire. And then Gandalf at one point, I think I left out one very important part.
Yeah.
There's a ring. I skip over it because I'm like, my mind is very clearly being like, not Lord of the Rings, not Lord of the Rings. Don't do Lord of the Rings stuff. But he finds a ring at one point when they are underground with the goblins, and they are basically taken except for Bilbo manages to escape, but he falls down into a cavern. He can only go deeper and deeper, and at the very bottom of the heart of the roots of the mountain, he finds this creature named Gollum, and Gollum is obsessed with a little ring, but he doesn't know much about the ring except for that he finds it, picks it up, and puts it in his pocket. And after a game of riddles, which is very intriguing and very fun to watch and listen to in any form that it exists in, basically Bilbo wins the game of riddles, and it is held in high regard by anyone who actually cares about that kind of thing. But Gollum doesn't care because he is infested with this ring's the selfishness that comes with being the possessor of the ring, and tries to kill him. But Bilbo had it in his pocket, so he puts it on, he disappears and escapes. And then at the end, Gandalf's like, so I know you have something. and Bilbo's like, what? No. And then Gandalf's like, don't take it lightly, put it away, be careful. And that's pretty much where we're left off. And that is also in the book, which I very much enjoy. That it was a very nice setup. Even before any of the other stuff existed, he knew how to leave a non-stressful cliffhanger.
Right.
There was no like, when's the next thing? It was like, oh no, no, okay.
No Nick Fury to walk in at the end.
I heard you have a ring.
Yeah. That was not a very fast summary, but a summary. Yeah,
No, I thought it was perfect. I was like, when you were getting to the end, I was like, oh man, the ring though. I was right there with
completely
you.
Forgot like half of it.
Yeah. I mean, and obviously that's the huge MacGuffin for everything that comes after it. But I mean, I think it is interesting, right, that in this Hobbit story, the ring is not a central piece. It's just sort of like Bilbo finds it. Gollum's a little angry that he took it, but yeah, for all intents and purposes, if this is the only thing you consume, you're like, oh, that's a cool little piece of jewelry. He found a sword that reacts to goblins / orcs, right? And he found it's like just a bunch of different things, and it's like, so it's just one other like magical artifact, but then you realize, yeah, oh, actually no, this is the centerpiece of like this entire universe essentially for ages. I mean, literally like have ages built off of it. But no, that was beautiful. I feel like I got to put like epic music behind the explanation, and then
By all means.
needle scratches and everything built in.
It's got to be The Godfather.
Damn it, that wasn't Lord of the Rings. Well, I was trying to do like
be
that
even better.
eerie, like Lord of the Rings. There is something that, like, the beginning music sounds very similar.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, what you did, I loved it.
I understand you have something in your pocket.
I believe in Middle Earth.
in all things involved with that music, Joe Green dies. So,
Well, that was very well put, though, CJ. So, and I think, yes, it's great because then I think we have reference points and we can dive in a little deeper as we start going through everything. But yeah, I think it's definitely a timeless story. And we just talked about it, I mean, briefly, and we've barely scratched the surface on this. I mean, this is a dense text for something that's not very long. You know, like there's so much packed in there. There's so much lore, and I think that's what's so wonderful about a story like The Hobbit is that I love watching things or reading things where you can tell that there's more to the world that you've seen. Like you're like, oh, that's a weird throwaway thing. Like, why do goblins live in this mountain? Why is there a mountain that has all this treasure left over? Like, what's the deal with that? Like, you get some details, but then you watch something like Rings of Power, which came out last year, I'm pretty sure, of 2023, I should say, or 2022. I can't remember anymore. Yeah.
Already, yeah.
And you're like, oh yeah, here we're actually introduced to the people who built that mountain, like, you know, and it's like, oh god, and it's like connected so far back, and there's a whole little story too about some like dick swinging contest with hammers.
That's really the foundation of dwarf history.
Yes.
Which Durin is it? Let's find out.
Yeah, exactly. So perhaps then we should dive into the history of The Hobbit and how it even came to be and how this whole story came about. So Tolkien himself recollected, if you will, that he began The Hobbit one day early in the 1930s. He was pursuing an academic career at Oxford, and while he was marking school certificate papers, he found a blank page. Suddenly inspired, he wrote the words, "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit." By late 1932, he had finished the story and then lent the manuscript to several friends, including C.S. Lewis and a fellow student named Elaine Griffiths. This is bullshit. You think he elaborated on this a little too much?
I don't know. Did they cover this in the Tolkien movie?
I don't know. Did you see that?
No, I didn't.
I
know there's like stuff where like he looks over at a hill and it's like gives him like a World War I memory, but then it like smooths over to like a hobbit hole or something. Like it's a lot of stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure. That's another thing that I always wonder about is like, is that accurate? You know what I mean? Or was that just another one of those things where they just ignored his letter where it's like, there's no allegory. I'm not making a comparison. I'm making this all up. Because also you can't escape the influence of the entirety of his World War I experience and being the only person that lived from his town that he knew.
Right.
So it's all there. I mean, I can imagine that when like Moria, like being under, but that's a whole nother thing. But like all of the underground stuff with Erebor, it could be. I could see the Shire being like just overgrown, like visiting Flanders Fields like 5 years after.
I mean, there's something interesting to be spoken to, and we'll kind of talk to it because I don't think there is a lot of talk in the history anywhere you read it unless you have somebody who's a historian of like Tolkien and like, well, obviously you can draw the comparisons between this vying for treasure that's compared to like, this manifest destiny that like all these countries had during World War I, and like they all fought for this territory because they all had these pacts, and it's like, well, yeah, but it's like, I also remember in school learning about the Wizard of Oz, and people were like, well, this is based on the silver standard. You can draw this comparison back to the 1890s. And like Frank L. Baum, like obviously made the Tin Man because it's a metaphor for silver. And it's like, or he just came up with this shit and was like, I'm sure there was some influence, but like, it's not like he's sitting there going, okay, now silver slippers, that's representative of silver. Right. Cowardly Lion, that's Taft or something, or like Theodore Roosevelt. It's like, come on.
No, if you're gonna write like a nonfiction story, your life experiences are gonna be in there, whether it's like minuscule or not, and whether you mean for it or not. Like, I think it's mostly accidental, and then someone can read it, look at your life, and be like, oh, well, I guess I can draw comparisons, but No, I don't think it's necessarily 1-to-1. And he's not like, I want to sum up my experience in the war with hobbits.
It had also been a long time. It had been a long time. Not that say that he would have forgotten any of his experiences, but it had been a long time, and he had been, as you were saying, he's at Oxford. He quite literally, like, his life is languages. His life is working with his students. That's all he's doing, aside from his favorite time, which is going home and reading bedtime stories to Christopher and things like that. And
Right.
it all falls into place. But I feel like in every case when someone's like, this is that, it's no.
Yeah.
No, because he intended, and he very clearly explains in that one letter that was like, yeah, there's no allegory. I know you're going to say there's allegory. There's no allegory. What am I drawing comparisons on? Whatever you want, but I'm not.
Right.
Which was what he explicitly says.
Well, and I mean, the 15 years following World War II are so tumultuous. There's so many things going on and changing in the world. Like
World War One?
World War One.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay. There was also a lot after World War II.
I mean,
You're
there was.
completely right.
But, like, I mean, obviously that informs, I mean, you know, the whole world experience. Like, you can't ignore, though, the way that the world is changing. Of course, and Fred said it too, even subtly, you're going to incorporate these themes and things into the story because, yeah, you saw it up close. But this is 15 years after World War One. And it's like, it's not like he's sitting there. I mean, yes, there's PTSD and you think about your war experience, but you're not just like, I really need to put this on paper in fiction. Like, you know, it's like, I mean, unless that is like your way of working through trauma. But if he said himself, like, that's not what it is, then okay, well, it's coming from the horse's mouth. I mean, that sounds pretty embellished, the fact that he's like, yes, this blank page. Let me write down this line. Yes, I have a story now, you know, but it's like, I mean, I think it's like, there's probably something like, that's an interesting idea. He's just thinking about like, I write down shit all the time. And I'm like, this could be something.
Yeah, well, C.S. Lewis was at the zoo. He was like a lion. Witch and a wardrobe. That's a story.
Perhaps he watched or read The Wizard of Oz and was like, yes, there's a lion, a witch. I don't know where the wardrobe is at, but she's got to keep the slippers somewhere.
I'm sure there was a wardrobe in that house.
I want to go to the zoo that just has wardrobes all over the place.
To be clear, I don't know when The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was written. That's not what this podcast is about. 1936, so his friend Elaine Griffiths, who was a fellow student, was visited in Oxford by Susan Dagnall. So keep track of the names that start getting passed around here, because it starts going from one person to the next. Who was a staff member, Dagnall was, of the publisher George Allen in Unwin. She is reported to have either lent Dagnall, this is now speaking back to Griffiths, a copy of the manuscript of The Hobbit, or she was suggested to borrow it to Dagnall by Tolkien himself. In any event, Dagnall was impressed by it and showed the book to Stanley Unwin of her publishing company, who then asked his 10-year-old son Rayner to review it. Rayner's favorable comments settled Allen and Unwin's decision to publish The Hobbit.
It's kind of like the original Lights, Camera, Jackson at the time. Rayner.
We owe that 10-year-old a lot.
We do.
It's just like how we all owe Viggo Mortensen's son a lot of credit too. The same
Oh, for
thing.
sure.
He's just like, do it, Dad, and he's like, all right.
Did he also tell him to do Green Book? Dad, you can be
I've seen you eat pizza. You can do this.
make sure you laugh with the pizza in your mouth like you do in real life.
I do like that idea of a 10-year-old reading it, because there's just like, it's a smartly written book, but there is a lot of like cool kid logic stuff, like the sword that does light up when the orcs get by. Like that captured my imagination as like a 10-year-old, or even just the ring like making you disappear. That's cool.
Yeah, I always enjoyed how non-contrived a lot of the situations are in Tolkien. It's always very commonsensical, or at least good sense is applied, and then you can follow it that way. So you're not always pissed off at the characters for making dumb decisions.
Right.
They do sometimes, but not that often.
Well, yeah, I mean, to also borrow again from Star Wars or something like that. It's not just like force healing is coming out of nowhere. Oh, look at that power they can do now. It's like, right? You remember he had 8 movies where nobody did this, but now.
That's the great part about Gandalf is like, I don't really know what he can do. Like magic wise, I don't necessarily know if he can help me in this situation that we're in right now.
Which is
We'll
what
do
makes
something.
Yeah, that's Gandalf is by far, I think, probably my favorite character, specifically because of that, because of the fact that he is this ancient Maiar who has been sent here to do a task, and it is taking him thousands of years, but he's fine with that because he knows the whole time he's like, I got to be using my time because this is going to get bad before it gets really good.
Yeah, right.
And what can he do? Good question.
And we obviously learn a lot. I mean, and I think that, and not to speak again about Lord of the Rings too much, but one of the things I do love about Fellowship is like you kind of establish from the beginning, like Gandalf is super powerful, but like he's so like overmatched the more the journey goes on, and he's just like doing everything he can up until he fights the Balrog, and you're like, oh shit, like this guy, he's literally throwing it all down, and like. And it's like, wow, Gandalf doesn't have a solution here. Like, he's just going to throw his body on the line and see what happens. Like, it's just kind of, it's crazy. He is such a complex character and brilliantly performed by so many people. But John Huston in the Rankin Bass movie, I can't wait to talk about that.
That's right. It is John.
And then, I know you guys thought I was going to say Ian McKellen, who he is. I mean, he is Gandalf. Like, But back to our history. Originally, Allen and Unwin planned to illustrate the book only with the end paper maps that Tolkien had provided, but Tolkien's first tendered sketches so charmed the publisher's staff that they opted to include them without raising the book's price despite the extra cost to the publisher. Tolkien's correspondence and the publisher's records show that he was involved in all the design and illustration of the entire book. All elements were subject of considerable correspondence and fussing over by Tolkien. Rainer Unwin, who in his publishing his memoir later on, the 10-year-old kid got his own memoir. In 1937 alone, should I do this as a British?
Yes, please.
Should I do it as a 10-year-old or as a 30-year-old?
Yes.
In 1937 alone, Tolkien wrote 26 letters to George Allen and Unwin, detailed, fluent, often pungent, but infinitely polite and exasperatingly.
That was very much like a 10-year-old would try to say that word. Precise. Love that it's like this fucking probably 40-year-old man. The first edition of The Hobbit was published on the 21st of September, 1937. It's a day before my birthday.
Aw.
With a not 1937. It was 50 years earlier than I was born. But yeah, I'm almost 50 years after that came out. I was born, so 50th anniversary. Here you got a real life fucking dwarf. It had a print run of 1,500 copies, which sold out by December because of the enthusiastic reviews. God, I love the online encyclopedias and stuff. They have so many crazy details. Like, I mean. We're going to be skimming the surface. There's so much to learn about The Hobbit. So, again, I encourage you guys to jump in anywhere you have anything to add or other points to make.
Sure.
So, in December 1937, The Hobbit's publisher, Stanley Unwin, asked Tolkien for a sequel. In response, Tolkien provided drafts for The Silmarillion, but the editors rejected them, believing that the public wanted more about hobbits. Tolkien subsequently began work on The New Hobbit, which would eventually become the title Lord of the Rings, a course that would not only change the context of the original story, but lead to substantial changes, to the character of Gollum. So I was mentioning this before. In the first edition of The Hobbit, Gollum willingly bets his magic ring on the outcome of the riddle game, and he and Bilbo part amicably. But in the second edition edits, to reflect the new concept that he was working on with Lord of the Rings and the idea of the One Ring and its corrupting abilities, Tolkien made Gollum more aggressive towards Bilbo and distraught at losing his ring. So, very interesting, that we give George Lucas so much shit for the special editions. Tolkien was the OG doing this back with The Hobbit to retrofit.
Yeah, there were a lot of different. If there's one theme about The Hobbit specifically across the book and all of the following literature that was involved with the sequel technically, I guess, and the movie, was that there was a lot, or the movies, there was an awful lot of going back once they had already committed quite a bit to one type way in which the story must go, and then being like in the movie. In the first one, in the prologue, when Smaug actually bursts through the front of Erebor and invades, that's a different dragon when the movie came out in theaters than the one that you can buy now and stream now. They went back and they re-edited it because they didn't have Smaug yet. So they made a whole different dragon that then had a tail and had the right scales and had the right amount of, the amount of claws and everything and the color relativity. So if you watch the like theatrical version, if you can find one that came out in the theaters, they then had to go back and completely redo that when they were releasing it. And that was because one person, I think, wrote a letter to them. And they were like, I notice. And they're like, oh, okay. Alan, Gordon, like all of the artists were just like, we have to change it. So they did. But
You're talking about the live action, the Peter Jackson
yeah, the
ones?
Peter Jackson one, they had to go back and redo that because they were like, well, that doesn't make any sense if it's a different dragon. How do we explain that? So they had to go back and do it. But it happened in the book, and I'm certain that something in the Rankin Bass was like that. And they were like, maybe.
Well, yeah. Did they, and I don't know if I even have this here, did they go back and change stuff for the Return of the King based on the Bakshi movie?
I don't know, Tom. You probably have to watch it to really soak it in.
I don't think so.
I don't
Because when was the Bakshi movie? When did that one come out?
The Return of the King.
Yeah.
Or no, the just Lord of the Rings, I think it's called. That's in like the 70s.
Okay. Well, if in any case, the Ralph Bakshi and
Rankin
Bass.
So Rankin Bass and Ralph Bakshi both did both like were the major influences for Peter Jackson cinematically. And I love watching those side by side comparisons. Yes. It's shocking how like they were able to emulate so many of the animated shots that they did, and B, they were actually able to like just make it better in a way where it was just like, yeah, that was good enough. Let's just do that because that was the best rendition we could think of. And it probably cut down on their work as well as also not cut down and made it easy, but in terms of being like, okay, we don't need to worry about being creative on that one. We can just do what Ralph Bakshi did, and we can just do what Rankin Bass did.
It does look like the Bakshi movie came out in 1978. Return of the King came out in 1980.
Oh, okay.
So it did have a little bit of leeway, but I would imagine they were probably working on it already, right?
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, to me, it kind of feels, what it feels a lot like? The most recent Star Wars trilogy.
Oh, yeah.
Because it does feel like there's the first one, The Force Awakens or whatever, The Hobbit. And then the second one is a complete departure. It looks different. What it focuses on is different, which is like the Ralph Bakshi. And then the third Star Wars movie is kind of like, oh, forget the second one. Let's go back to the first one. All the stuff I was doing. Like, that's what J.J. Abrams, I felt, was doing. And that's kind of what the third one feels with The Return of the King. It's like, no, we're going back to the Hobbit stuff we were doing. Don't worry about the middle part.
Yeah, I could see that.
Down to the same voice cast, actually. I think it was Orson Bean again who voiced, I think in this case it was, would it be Frodo, probably? Because I noticed he's the lead actor, so I was like, yeah, so he is both Frodo and Bilbo in Return of the King. Which, before we jump ahead, because obviously we can start talking about some of the media adaptations, but I don't want us to shortcut anything else about the book development. I don't know if you have anything else to share in your findings, CJ, about the book.
One thing, and that I think I might have a misconception on this, but I have a long-standing memory of it being that Tolkien was a blank sheet of paper. I always heard that it was a napkin, and that he was at the bar. He was at the pub, and that he had his papers and he was grading his papers. Because that's just, one of the things you do. He's like, I don't want to be in my stuffy office.
Right.
So he was at the pub and having a pint, and it was right before he was about to go home, and he was just finishing all that up. And he had been working all day, and that's what came to his mind because it had been in the back of his mind. And he's like, yeah, in a hole in the ground there lied a hobbit, or whatever it was. Not lied a hobbit. He's not dead. But, whatever that line was. And that's the way that I always remembered it. And I'm kind of surprised that it was just like, yeah, I just wrote it down because there was paper.
Well, I feel The Hobbit is the kind of story you do write in a pub, right?
That's why I feel like it was. There's a warmth to that, right? That narrative all of a sudden gets this very personal level of focus, and I really enjoy that. So that's what I'll choose to believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do know that there is. That's the story of how J.K. Rowling wrote Harry Potter. Is that she was at a restaurant or a bar or something like that, and she started writing down the beginning of that book on a napkin.
Oh.
So I don't know if you're conflating the two or not, because it does also sound right. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, where does the best work happen?
Well,
You're getting drunk, right? Yeah.
I never heard that about J.K. Rowling, so it could be like retrofit.
But now I'm like
someone else.
wondering, like, did she just steal that story about Tolkien too? Now it's like, I don't know.
Gotta keep napkins on deck. That's what I'm thinking about.
You might be inspired to write the next
That's what I'm
fantasy
thinking.
novel.
Can't do it on a wet wipe.
Yeah, I'll have to maybe do a little bit of digging around, but yeah, at least this was the one that came from Wikipedia. You know, the obviously the unassailable resource for everything in the world. But
You said infallible wrong.
I apologize. Were you saying something?
No, I was just gonna ask what the Lord of the Rings Wikipedia is called.
The Lord of the Rings Wikipedia. I gotta find this
Because
Is it
like
one wiki
it, like
to
there's
rule
like
them all?
Wikipedia.
Yeah.
I like yours.
One wiki to rule
Yeah.
them all. Is that you think?
Tolkipedia.
It is something like the One Ring wiki or something like that.
That's not bad either.
Pretty sure Tolkipedia is a Pokemon.
Togepi? Yeah, the one wiki to rule them all is the official name
I like that.
of the fan.
That should be like a game show for this show. Is like, what do you think the Wikipedia is called for this property?
Yeah, I like.
That really should be part of like our
That's not a
every
bad
episode. Because there's gonna be
Mm-hmm.
a different wiki, even for like McDonald's or something like that.
Wikipedia.
Oh, wait a minute.
Is it Wikipedia?
I gotta know now.
Sandwich that's famous. I can't think of it. The Big Mac. I guess.
Yeah.
Macapedia.
Oh, I don't know if McDonald's does have their own fan Wikipedia, but I'm gonna definitely find out.
I thought you were gonna say I'm definitely gonna make one. Right.
I mean, it's just called the McDonald's Wiki. That's kind of boring.
Oh man,
I know.
missed opportunities.
It really is. It really is. But regardless, I think the idea seems to be, at least somewhere in the lexicon, that Tolkien was inspired in a non-conventional environment. It wasn't like he was sitting down at his typewriter and like, now I shall write this book. It was somewhere. He was just sort of probably like, but whatever, grading papers, whatever. And I'm like, yeah, actually, that's a good line. It is kind of how art starts sometimes, but it does feel very like movie, like Charles Dickens is like looking at like, I don't know, like some kid with a crutch. And he's like, yes, that's my character.
Some kid with a crutch.
Keep moving, David. Don't look at him.
Wait,
Boy, what's your name?
Mom, that man keeps staring at me.
just keep walking. Just keep walking. I mean, like one thing that I absolutely love about Tolkien is that his entire way of writing and creating stories in general, or just working, was all about what would hold his interest. And then everything after that followed, how do I keep other people as interested as I am in this for the entire time? Because The Hobbit was like, he simplified it in some respects, specifically to be like, kids got to be able to read it.
Right.
But also anyone can read it if they wanted to. But then The Lord of the Rings was written very specifically, yet again, as he states in that same letter from before, is that he needed to make sure that it was something that would actually hold someone's attention for the entirety of an epic style and length story.
Right.
And that kind of focus where but he's still being true to himself. He's still saying, this has to be interesting to me first, but that was his challenge that he gave himself. And I think that the proof was in the pudding when it came to The Hobbit. It was like, this doesn't need to be particularly long, but I told an awful lot of story in a short amount of time. And I can work everything else out. I mean, he had to create. I love that he presented the Silmarillion first. What a cocky move. Good job, Jay. But he was like, the Silmarillion is one of those things where it's like he had to write that because he was like, how do we get here? and he wrote everything. And then he wrote all the languages. He figured out he invented the languages of the elves. And then he did some of the dwarves, but he specifically also didn't do some of the dwarves because in the story he was like, but they're really secretive about it.
Yeah.
Nobody knows the dwarven languages. So he very specifically left that out. But he also left out Mordor and Black speech and all those other things. So I love that amount of dedication to it. But,
I mean, yeah, and there was some we touched on, I think, in our Lord of the Rings episode 2 where we started talking about that. But I mean, the man invented a language, like, and that to me is like the marks of somebody who is like brilliant, that can actually like go through the whole like, behavior or this like exercise of trying to create their own language of like, how would they say this word? How would they say that word? What does this word mean? And it's like, I mean, the world building is so giant. I love somebody like offering like their index of like, here's the whole coda of how this story works. Just give us the sequel. Be like George Lucas coming up. You want to know where the Wookiees came from? I got this whole Christmas special. We can talk about life.
how many wise?
I always joke too, not to get off on another tangent, but just I love the obsession that George Lucas and like every Star Wars writer has with like the letters K and Y. There is just an unnecessary amount of K's and Y's in everyone's name. I'm like, can we just use some other letters? Like Han Solo doesn't even touch that shit. And like, he's got the coolest sounding name, like Orlando, like
Plo Koon.
like, right? Like that's not a normal thing to say. Like, who comes up with that?
Yeah,
right. But like, and I think to bring it back to Tolkien though too is like some of these names are kind of goofy. I mean, you rattled off every dwarf name over and over again, which again is so impressive. I couldn't have named 3. I think even as having watched the movie last night, but
Tolkien will also give you like Bolin, Golan. No, like he'll give you a couple of those.
But why, if it ain't broke, why fix it? Like if it's oin and gloin, hey man, you're gonna hit that name scheme.
Yeah, he's very passive in his references too, which is another thing that I really enjoy. Is that in The Hobbit, even though he hadn't really built everything out yet, all of the references within the story and self-contained within The Hobbit are very passive. They're just there and they're not in your face. He's not like, look. It's more like, no, that's there. Like that thing is there. And then when he writes the rest of the story, it's like, oh, that's from like 8,000 years ago. Like that's still around, huh? It's like when, like all of a sudden Glorfindel shows up and you're like, you mean the guy from, oh my God, he's an old guy. It's like, it's cool. It's just cool learning about it.
It is. And I think it's just, I mean, you kind of look at it too. And I think something I was just about to comment on with the whole idea with the name scheme though, too. I mean, that's kind of Chinese history though, too, right? It's like a lot of names were very similar. Like, like Zhou Yu and like Zhou Yin. Like that was like his son, or like Sima Lu, Sima Yin or something like that. It's like there was a lot of similarities. And I think you can draw a lot of comparisons to like it being like, I'm trying to remember who the king was of Gondor. Like it's like
Isildur?
Not Isildur. Of like who was kind of like it was like Denethor?
Oh, Denethor? Yeah, the steward.
The guy who eats the gross tomato.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, Denethor.
But isn't his son's name like very similar? Oh no, that's Faramir.
Boromir and Faramir.
Yeah. Well, okay, there you go there too, right? It's like Boromir, Faramir. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm belaboring a bad point, but
it's more expensive to change a suffix.
Yes.
Like Frodo's, I think dad is Frollo or something like
Froyo?
that. Froyo.
Froyo Baggins.
Froyo Baggins. Now that was a tie-in they should have done.
Oh,
missed
Froyo
it.
Baggins.
Imagine if Froyo was big, like really big as it is like now, like back in then. Oh man.
What flavor do you want? Potato.
Potato.
Love it.
Just like trying to think of like Gandalf, but I couldn't come up with a good one. Like Gumdolph? Like, Gumdolph. It's like Gumball, but Gumdolph.
There's so many that ride a line though. You got Gildor. You're like,
yeah.
All right.
Yeah, but I mean, how much of world history though still stands today, right? Like we still have the Colosseum in Rome that's almost 2,000 years old, right? Like We have the Great Wall of China. I don't know when that was built, but we know that's like ages old though too. It's like, so you do have, I mean, not characters that are people that are from back then, but it's like these structures that persevere over time. And it's like, oh yes, light the torches, like Gondor. No, again, we're talking about Lord of the Rings, but it's like, I think there is so much about the world that he really picked up on, and like things that I feel like don't resonate as much in other fantasy stories for some reason.
Yeah, it's true. Tolkien's kind of the one that, aside from like that and like Warhammer 40K, I don't know any other series that are just like, there's a lot of time we're dealing with here.
Right.
So
The Hobbit has now been adapted many times for a variety of media, starting with March 1953. They did a stage production at St. Margaret's School in Edinburgh, Scotland. And then the first motion picture adaptation of The Hobbit was Gene Deitch, I believe is how you pronounce the last name. It was a 1966 short film of just cartoon stills. Kind of sounds like rudimentary, like Disney. Like, have you guys ever seen some of the old Disney cartoons? They're very, very just,
yeah.
low production. But then it was in 1968, we mentioned the BBC Radio did their own broadcast of a 8-part radio drama. It was by Michael Kilgariff. And then in 1977, we had the Rankin Bass animated film based on the book. It was first broadcast on NBC in the United States in 1977, and the teleplay won a Peabody Award. The film received a Christopher Award, which I don't know what that is. I didn't get that far in my research.
It definitely involves someone named Christopher. That's all we know. Here, you can have my award. Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
It's just a picture of him.
I mean, well, let's talk a little bit about some of these adaptations, though, too, because I think we're still going to be able to get into a lot of the story, talking about some of the beats that happen in these movies and these plays and everything else. But I think when you look at something like Rankin and Bass, which I've learned recently a lot of people have a lot of love for, starting with Fred, but, it's definitely an animated movie that has a lot of, like, those old-fashioned Disney things, but man, you appreciate a little bit more about some of the Disney animation when you look at like the my laugh out loud moment last night when I was watching this for the first time was like, well, there's two parts. One, there's just a cell where it's like they're coming over to like a mountaintop, I think, to look at the mountain, and it just sort of like the characters just sort of pop up, like they look like they pulled the slide. I was like,
I remember that.
and then the moment where like Gandalf like turns the trolls to stone, which is not how it happens in the book, right? Isn't that Bilbo who stalls for time?
It's actually it's weird in the book. If I'm remembering correctly, I thought that it was almost like he's stalling for time a little bit, like kind of more like in the more current movies. But then Gandalf just like was there the whole time. Like he wasn't gone. He was just like, no, and just like was watching from the bushes. And then it was like, and there you go. And and I don't even remember if was it a rock splitting or was it the sun all of a sudden was just there. I can't remember. I just remembered it was different. It was very different from the Rankin and Bass.
Because in the Rankin and Bass, he basically just makes the sun come up. Mm-hmm. And then they turn to stone and they're like dead. He's just like, excellent.
He moved on very quickly.
He just murdered whether or not they were going to eat your companions. It's just a very like exclamatory of joy. But I guess, yeah, I don't know. Maybe, Fred, if you want to even kick us off with this one, talk a little bit about some of your love for the Rankin Bass a little bit more. And we only kind of touched on it briefly last time.
Oh, I just love the animated Hobbit. I put up there with what was the other movie that they did that we talked about with me, the Last Unicorn.
Mm-hmm.
Very similar, where it's got this art style where the creatures can be very grotesque, which work, like I feel like a thing with Disney is there's like kind of gorgeousness to their villains, where like this, like there's kind of like the drawings of the goblins, even some of the elves are like kind of freaky looking. And I really like that. I think it was the music. And also I think kind of that old school animation style made it feel uneasy, especially the Ralph Bakshi one, but even the Hobbit ones, I think that added to the experience for me. And that's all I got.
No, I agree. I was genuinely taken aback when I finally watched the animated one from the 70s and how it was like, those are elves. you know, and they're like very strong Eastern European accented elves. It was very that was the part that always got me, was like how in the end they were just the Battle of the Five Armies, right? At the end, how they're just like, we do not agree. We don't agree. We do not agree. And then they all fight. And then someone's like goblins, and everyone's like, it's not that our shit's on pause, but we're all just like, no, we're friends now. Let's go get them. And then they're like, we will follow you into battle. It was very strange, and I loved it because it was memorable and it was different.
And the wood elves look so different than the other elves, which like in the movies, live action, they're just like, I don't know, they're just, you know. Like,
that pissed me off. Because I loved the Rankin Bass so much. I thought, because I'm not like deep on Lord of the Rings lore, I thought this was a different type of elf. This was like a, you know, subset that had more intense features. Like, because they look like weird, like woodland things.
Yeah.
And I just love that look. And then when I got to the live action, I was like, these are just like more hotties.
Yeah.
I always kind of work my way around that thought, because I used to think the same thing, where it was like, they're different types of elves, aren't there? There's wood elves, there's the Noldor, there's all those different groups. But the way that I always look around it is, it's like, let's consider the Lord of the Rings is from humans and hobbits perspective. And because, I mean, they're technically related, and they're just seeing elves, but to an elf, they would see it like you did, where it would be like, oh, you're a wood elf, you know, like, look at how different you are, you know, and it was, they do kind of look like a mix of Tinkerbell and an old banana, but it's, but you know, between that and the Jolly Green Giant, you do have some pretty imposing figures. I always thought that they were very primitive in that movie, too, which also, it still fit, because it fit the theme. I love all renditions, as long as it's like they're different.
Yeah. Watching that though too, with the context of knowing that's Rankin Bass, like you can hear some of the same voice actors from those movies too, and like you were talking about the Eastern European accent, and I was like, oh, that's just Burgermeister Meisterburger from fucking Santa Claus. It's like, you're in the realm of the wood elves.
How did you get to the top of this stairs? It's like, I genuinely, it made me pay attention though.
Yeah.
It was like, how did they know to get my, like, because at that point in the story, I would always be like, what are they captured now? And then it'd be like, Yule. I was like, okay, time to listen up. That guy's speaking.
Yeah.
It was pretty good.
Yeah. When was your first time you encountered the Rankin Bass movie then?
I think I watched it when I was a kid.
Oh, you did?
Before I
Okay.
knew about any of this. I think I did, but I can't confirm that I did, because it was definitely one of the movies that was at my local library.
Sure.
And so my dad would get like that, My Neighbor Totoro, that was it. And then they would have those on at home. And I think that I watched it probably quite a few times, but I never realized the connection. I didn't know what it was, but I did rewatch it just this last year, I think in October, with Allison, and the two of us were just like, this is kind of amazing.
Yeah.
Like, this is just a whole different take. And I loved every minute of it because of that expedited, like,
It moves.
just do the whole thing in like 70 minutes.
Yeah.
And have time for some good songs. Like, you know, like, that's the thing. It moves, and like, it has most of the songs that the Peter Jackson movies have. Like,
Yeah.
Yep. The music made a big difference to me in The Hobbit.
Yeah.
In all renditions of it.
Although there is definitely a moment too where like they're like talking to the Elven King in that, and like there's like a very, very slow, gradual cross mix of two songs, so they're kind of playing simultaneously. I just remember I was sitting there with Jasmine, my fiance, and she's just like, there's two songs playing at once right now. And she's like, I can't even listen to what they're saying, because it's like I'm trying to pay attention to the one soundtrack that's kind of epic and the one that's still somebody singing about what's happening, and like
It's a lot, but it's great.
It was all wonderful. I'm like, are the goblins actually singing this song, or is this just their inner monologue? Like, kill the dwarves and eat them up.
And I know in Return of the King, they definitely sing. Like, there's like, because I remember when Sam and Frodo are like going into Mordor, they're singing like a song like, when there's a whip, there's a way.
Yep. Don't break the dishes or whatever. That's
Yeah,
what Bilbo
well,
Baggins
and
was.
then
The
that's the
knives.
plates. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates.
And both renditions are surprisingly similar. I always love that because then they go into the like behind the scenes stuff for the movie The Hobbit, and they're talking about how it's like, yeah, we had to reimagine this, we went through it, and then as soon as you get to the end, you're like, well, you arrived at the same station. You took different trains, but you got to the same place.
Yeah, I feel like I gotta play at least a snippet from the Bilbo Baggins hate song because that just kept coming back. He's having like dreams about this song, and I'm like, boy, this dude really loved a fucking song with his name in it. Like,
Well, you're looking up. Have you seen The Last Unicorn? The Rankin Bass.
I don't
You
think
should
so.
check it out. It's like an hour 20 Rankin Bass animated movie with songs by America.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it's got like an insane vocal cast, and it's very like 80s fantasy. Like it's very similar. I think you would enjoy it.
it does sound good. Okay, so here is from the animated movie.
That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. So carefully with the plates. Blunt the knives and bend the forks. Smash the bottles, turn the corks. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. So carefully with the plates.
And I forgot, it's also in the live action movie.
Anytime you hear a whistle, like a flute in that is James Nesbitt or Jim Nesbitt who plays Biffer.
Really?
Yeah, he genuinely is. They were just like, "Do you want?" He's like, "Oh yeah, I brought it along." What do you think he was doing in hair and makeup?
Hearing that though made me wish I just had like a sloppy pint of Guinness just to be like shaking around, getting it mostly everywhere.
They really hit that flavor, didn't they?
Yeah.
They really did.
It did. It's I mean, yeah, you always have kind of that feel. They very much capture Irish culture as kind of the shorthand for hobbits in these movies, right? Like
Well, these movies just make me want to make a roast chicken. I'm serious.
I
Like,
agree.
I love a Sunday where you just throw on Lord of the Rings and you put a roast in the oven with some potatoes.
It is true. If there's one thing that I know a lot of people have been doing recently, like another evolution of enjoying these movies, especially with The Hobbit, is they just watch those parts like in the beginning, and then they come up with a menu for all of their guests that is very specifically geared towards what they saw in his pantry, or like, and everything looks that exact same way. So it's like,
Right.
we're making these very special pastries from that thing. We're gonna have a drinking game where every time that Biffer, plays his flute or whatever, everyone has to finish their drink, something like that. And they make those games, and I just love how it does have that sense of like, even though in every single one of those movies and each one of those stories, things get really serious.
yeah.
You're always starting a place where it's like homely and very calming, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's great. Should we talk a little bit about the live action movies? Because again, we mentioned the development is kind of crazy, but I just want to.
Insane.
But Peter Jackson and Fran Welsh originally expressed interest in filming The Hobbit in 1995 as a part of one of a trilogy. Parts 2 and 3 would have been based on Lord of the Rings. So a much different thought of what this could have been. But frustration arose when it was discovered that the distribution rights still belonged to United Artists, who had kept those rights earlier on, believing that the filmmakers would prefer to adapt The Hobbit rather than Lord of the Rings. So they were very strategic in understanding that if you were ever going to try and make a movie out of any of Tolkien's work, clearly you're going to want to start with The Hobbit, so you're going to have to come through us if you want to do that. So it was they were working with Miramax to try and get those rights. Ultimately fell through. Jackson then decided to press on with adapting Lord of the Rings. Ultimately, it was produced by New Line Cinema. And in September 2006, the ownership group and management of MGM expressed interest in teaming up with New Line and Jackson to make The Hobbit. But the project had been originally conceived as 2 parts as early as 2006, but the proposed contents and parts changed during development. MGM wanted a second film in 2006 that would be set between The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. So kind of what Battle of Five Armies became in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Where it was like, and when I say a second film, so basically they were like, we have 2 films that we want to make already, make us a third movie that's going to bridge the gap. So following a long string of lawsuits, and let me tell you guys, I'm going to gloss over this. There are so many lawsuits over this movie, and it's between everybody, between Harvey Weinstein and New Line Cinema, between United Artists, between Christopher Tolkien and the Tolkien estate and these guys. It was just crazy back and forward. So I'm going to spare you the drama of all this because it will make your head spin.
But there's more.
Oh, yes. But basically then on December 2007, New Line and MGM announced that Peter Jackson would be executive producer on The Hobbit and the sequel. Not the director, though, at this time. Should be clear. So despite the legal suits, development proceeded, and in April 2008, Guillermo del Toro was hired to direct these films. Del Toro had said that he was a fan of Peter Jackson's trilogy, and pre-production began around August 2008 with him, Peter Jackson, Fran Walsh, and Philippa Boyens writing the script. It's interesting to get into the history of Guillermo del Toro because he kind of like doesn't have a lot of love. Like he's like, I liked like The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings growing up, but he's like, but I was never a fanboy about these things. He's like, what really inspired him to do this was seeing the Lord of the Rings trilogy. He was like, this is a vision. This is a world.
Yeah.
And it was in 2010 that Del Toro left the project because of ongoing delays. He explained at a press conference that MGM's financial troubles that were ongoing at the time, partially due to some of these lawsuits, had basically stalled this project out, and that because the project had not even really been greenlit to fully go on with like filming like any further than it already had, he was like, I don't have time for this. I got to go make a movie about a fish man who fucks, you know,
Fish man who fucks.
So it was then in October of 2010 that New Line Cinema and Warner Brothers confirmed that The Hobbit was going to proceed filming with Peter Jackson stepping in as director. There's a lot of details that go around Peter Jackson basically stating that like he was not really given enough time and preparation to get into this. He was not expecting to direct these movies. He was involved with the writing because obviously he had a lot of the backgrounds. He was trying to help fill in the gaps for Del Toro. And they were very much a collaborative process, even though everybody kind of had a little bit of a different vision. But ultimately, it was going to be Del Toro's thing, right? Like, he had the whole vision. He had the storyboards, everything starting to work out. And then when he bailed, it was just sort of like, well, we want to go on with this. Hey, you did Lord of the Rings, but I don't think Peter Jackson is not as passionate about The Hobbit as he was about the Lord of the Rings itself. So I think it shows up a little bit on screen, too, in that there's so much filler. It's like they wanted to do what they did with the Rings of Power in The Hobbit. And I don't know that all that is bad, but it definitely makes for revisiting these movies a little bit of a daunting challenge, I think. And that's
I was just going to say, I saw it recently and it felt like 2 trilogies kind of at the same time.
Yeah.
One was like a Hobbit, you know, trying to summarize The Hobbit, and the other is let me make a prequel that leads up to my Lord of the Rings movies.
Right.
And let's put those 2 together, even though in some ways they are connected. They are loosely connected at times.
Yeah. But I guess, yeah. So what are your guys' thoughts on The Hobbit as a whole, though? Like, did you enjoy it? I mean, I'm talking about the live action one.
Yeah, I did. I very much enjoyed it. And there are personal reasons for that. But artistically and just in terms of like the writing and what they did in order to make it work, the further away I get from having just watched it and not read it, and now having all the other knowledge that I do and following those hyper-focused moments, I really do appreciate it much more the more that I learned about what they did to make it. Because when I was watching it the first time, I took all the criticisms that people had, like, you know, like, oh, the dwarves are so close to those furnaces or whatever. And it's like, you know, like that kind of thing where it's like they'd be burning up, but then you learn more about this, about just the world of Tolkien. You're like, oh yeah, no, dwarves are like hard to burn. They very specifically are fine in that kind of an environment, or like all those different things. And they included all of that. They put all of that information in there to make it make sense with Tolkien, but also make it entertaining. But to your point, they really did spitball quite a bit. There was a whole like year of filming after principal photography and a number of the pickups were done specifically just to figure out what the hell was going to happen in the Battle of Five Armies, because they had no idea. They had absolutely no idea. It was they did everything, and then they're like, everyone get in a room. And Peter was just like, what do we want to do? And they would just spitball, and they figured out all these things. I think it came together very well. I have only one issue with all three of them. For some reason, even though I love The Desolation of Smaug, it is a very, very good intermediary movie of the three. I always fall asleep.
Oh no.
When we get into El Erebor. Only then. I'm interested in what's being said. Maybe it's the time that I watched the movie. I don't know, but I always feel sleepy in that part. And I don't know why that is, but that's literally my only, like, I don't even know if it's a criticism as much as just something I've noticed about myself, is that the last, like, 6 times I've watched it, 4 of them I fell asleep.
Oh no.
And I don't know why. It's like, is it the pacing? What could it be? Is it just Benedict Cumberbatch? Is it the beauty of his voice? Is that what it is? I'm not sure.
You to sleep.
Yeah, but and it's not boring. That's another thing that is surprising, because there are plenty of boring movies that can put me out, but that one, if I'm like fully like there, it's like yes, and it was amazing in the theater. But for some reason, I just can't stay awake for that. I always wake up at the end though.
So
It's like, huh?
Yeah.
And only that part. I find that so strange. I think I don't know. Is it the big golden, like, king that becomes the big, like, the room, right? The room fills with gold, and then he later on, I think, has that like thing happen in the Battle of the Five Armies where he's getting sucked in, like that kind of a thing. That's always exciting, and it's like, oh, you need to know this beforehand. But that is my only real critique of it, other than like a lot of little minor things here and there. But
Very interesting.
It's impressive. I feel like every single one of the movies was. I also didn't know that they did it in very much in like, okay, if this then. And like they had that kind of a formula where it's like, yeah, let's make this happen and let's make this work. And they realized very quickly, and I thought rightfully, that they needed 3 in order to do it, because otherwise it was going to be just a little bit too dense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you feel like because you read the Silmarillion that helped your appreciation of those movies?
When I finally did read the Silmarillion, yes, it made them even better. It made about 80 to 90% of the criticisms that I had heard of The Hobbit just completely disappear, because those were just things from people who didn't know what they were showing.
Sure.
Because that was not the Tolkien universe. It's like there are just some things that it's like how some people think, like, sorry to bring Lord of the Rings back in again, but when the Witch King is killed, they think it's because that Éowyn is a woman that she kills him. Now, granted,
Just shocks him.
yeah, it's just but the knife, the dagger that Merry has is a magical dagger, because he gets that from the Barrow Downs, which is like north of the Shire, on their first trip when they're just trying to escape. They're taken by a Barrow Wight, which is basically like a massive magical zombie thing. And that thing was actually explicitly put there thousands of years before by the Witch King of Angmar, when he had first started doing his magical bullshittery and just in general messing with the people of Arnor. And so then that was just in that cave. They found it when Tom Bombadil shows up and just like, hey, fuck off, Barrow Wight, and then picks them up. They take them, great. They get to Rivendell. They're like, those are powerful blades. Great, have fun. And they go through the whole thing, and they go, he joins Rohan. He's in with the cavalry, and he stabs the Witch King with that magical blade that was made by the ancient Númenóreans, who were then their descendants were the people of Arnor, that had specifically made that blade with magic to combat the Witch King of Angmar and his wizardry, or whatever you would call it, his witchcraft.
Interesting.
So that's what ended up doing him in terms of annihilated all of his magical capacity and all its abilities. And then Éowyn was the person there. Anyone could have done it, but she was also one of the best like combat choices, right? Because she was actually an amazing master swordsman, essentially.
Right.
Swordswoman, swordsman, swordsperson. She knew what she was doing, and that was awesome too. But I feel like that doesn't take away from any of the like magnanimity of the situation.
Yeah. I mean, and I think there is something to be said too. It's like for anything you watch, and I think even Marvel and DC lean on this a little bit too, of like, if you've read all the comics, you kind of pick up on certain things and certain like powers that people have or artifacts, right? And it's like, and that's always going to add to your understanding of what's happening in these movies, or like the deeper lore understanding of why something is the way it is. But I think, yeah, at the same end, though, it's like for an audience that maybe hasn't read that, I think that's where some of those criticisms come from. Is like, well, what I got to read,
Yeah.
4 more books to understand exactly what this stuff is.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't know. I'm curious where you stand on this, Fred. Like, what do you think of the movies?
After rewatching them, I liked them more than when I originally saw them. The big thing for me is I kind of wish the Hobbit movies weren't made by Peter Jackson and the creative team, because, and I don't know if it was a time thing, I just think kind of the look of the film is different. And that would be fine if they didn't try to so intrinsically tie the 2 trilogies together with same actors and story points. And it doesn't bother me that much. That would be like my critique of it as a film, which maybe isn't even the best way to look at these 3 Hobbit movies. I think they're kind of like an experience of the book, The Hobbit. I don't think they necessarily work as individual movies, but I did enjoy rewatching them. I kind of think, like I said before, I wish almost they separated like the Hobbit stuff and kind of the build up to the Ring of Power, not the show, but just the idea of the ring. All the Gandalf journeys kind of that happen throughout the Hobbit movies. I almost wish like they did 3 Hobbit movies just like they did, the same story beats, but they were an hour 45 minutes long. And it just focused on that. If you're going to do a CG thing versus like the real look, blow that up more, give me more color, like, cause you're playing in The Hobbit versus Lord of the Rings. I kind of want it to look more different or be more similar than what it is, where it kind of sits in the middle.
Yeah.
And the big thing that bugs me about the Peter Jackson, and I think it's probably a time constraint thing, is why am I looking at a CG orc right now?
Right.
It was a facial expression thing.
But you have given me nightmares with people in prosthetics doing very little. Like, I don't need that much expression. A guy looking at you going, what about the legs? They look fresh. That to me is way more effective and scary than like the CG guy, which I think it's a cool design. It's just like, you gave me such good orc makeup for 3 movies, and now you're kind of giving me like, the computers.
Yeah, and they actually fell away from it at some point during the movies as they kept moving in, because they did a lot of practical orc makeup actually throughout the movie, but you never really get that as the focus. And also it might have also been because the guy who plays Azog is the same guy who plays like almost all of the other big orcs.
Yeah.
He's like the guy from Fellowship of the Ring, like the big Uruk guy.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's that one like absolutely. He also plays the Witch King. It's that Maori stuntman. What is his name? I can't remember. But
he's like been in other stuff recently. Too.
He's been in a load of
Being
stuff.
big.
Yeah, I don't think it is one of those things where it might have been a cost thing, but it's also like, but at the time, isn't that when CGI really started to like up the cost, because it was, then again, they were also cutting edge, right? So it was them and Star Wars, basically those 2 studios. You have Industrial Light and Magic, and then you have Weta Workshop that are doing everything. But then again, who did CGI on? It wasn't Weta.
I'm not
Right?
sure.
It was another part of the organization. It was not from New Line, but
Yeah. So just to put the pin in the actor, so they're crediting Lawrence McO'Are as Lurtz,
yeah.
but then they also credit someone named Brent McIntyre as the Witch King.
Maybe that's like the vocal
Voice.
performance.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, got it.
But yeah, he's the that's his guy.
There you go. So, but yeah, I think it's interesting, that they made that dynamic. I mean, with CGI, even I don't know, and I think the best thing that Hollywood has done is cooled it on trying to animate faces, unless you have somebody specifically doing a motion capture thing, similar to what Andy Serkis has been doing, right? And like, because I think he kind of revolutionized the technology. I think he's still the best person to understand how it works, because he had to kind of like make it work. Like he was the one who like revolutionized it with Peter Jackson. And but But I think there's so many times you see it, and I think the only other great example I can think of is like Josh Brolin as Thanos. And like it feels like you can actually kind of see him emote a little bit, and you kind of get the anguish in his face, in some of those moments. But I think that's something you saw a lot with Gollum, and you even see a little bit with King Kong when Andy Serkis is playing that. But I mean, I appreciate a good prosthetic. I love to see puppeteering and everything because I think there's so much more art to that than just trying to overlay somebody's face with animation. Like animation should be animation in my regard of like. Make a movie like the Bakshi movie, but make it like CGI, completely. And then you have a very interesting Lord of the Rings story.
Agreed.
I think separating it from the Lord of the Rings or making it more similar would have been a better option in my opinion, but I like what they did. Do you have any more ideas about the Jackson trilogy, Tom?
I guess where I stand on it was this, and I kind of hinted at this in our like kind of off pod conversation I was talking to you guys about. I don't think the content all bothers me. In fact, I think having watched Rings of Power now, I have a greater appreciation for some of the world building that was going on there. And I think even when I saw these movies in the theater, I was like, oh, this is interesting. But I didn't know the story of The Hobbit. I've never read The Hobbit. So I should actually put that out there as much as I'm going off of the Rankin Bass movie and these live action movies and then what I've read about it, But yeah, I've never read it, so I guess I was just kind of taking everything at face value. I was like, "Wow, they really set up like Sauron all the way back in this," and whether actually it was in that, it's not. But I guess I agree with you though, Fred. Like, I think my only big critique is it's kind of daunting to come back and be like 3-hour movies because they do sort of feel a little uneven in terms of the story they're trying to tell, and I don't think it's bad. I just think that there's a lot there that I would have loved them to streamline. And I kind of love the idea of like doing like 2 hours to really hit on the Hobbit story itself and be like, it's this, it's that, it's that. Now we're going to follow Gandalf around. Oh, he runs into, what's his name? Radigan or
Radagast?
Or Radagast? Radagast?
Radigan. I don't know what that is.
Pretty sure Radigan is the villain in The Great Mouse Detective. Radigan.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it.
Oh, it's Vincent Price, isn't it?
Ooh, Basil.
Can you imagine if that was Radigan?
Yes.
Vincent, and with Vincent Price as Radagast.
I have some bird shit in my hair.
Not good. Not good at all.
Gandalf, you bumbling fool of a wizard.
Why am I here, Gandalf?
It's funny when I do Vincent Price impression, it is the Great Mouse Detective Vincent
Yeah.
Price. It's not the like old school Vincent Price.
No. But it's so good. God, that's right, Radigan or whatever. I was like, why is his name not like Moriarty or like Radiarty or something? Moriarty?
Radigan and Basil.
Yeah,
Man, that movie's so good.
It's a good
I love that movie. We'll save it for the Great Mouse. We'll save it for the Sherlock podcast episode. The 100 different properties, which also stars some of the people in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
But to talk a little about, who is in this? So we have, I almost said Martin Short, which is not accurate, although that would be.
Martin was short, yes.
Yeah. So tell me there, Gandalf, what do you want me to burgle?
It has to be that character.
It has to be Jody
It has
Glick
to
like
be
doing
Jody
the
Glick.
like Bilbo. See, this is ring.
So why not a necklace? I don't know.
Martin Freeman.
Martin Freeman.
I tried to be so indignant about it.
Where am I?
So we have Martin Freeman, who plays Mr. Watson in the Sherlock TV show from the BBC. We have Richard Armitage as Thorin. We have Kate Blanchett as Galadriel, who is she in the Hobbit book?
She's
I don't think so.
No, because in they had to flesh that out, like what
Galadriel,
Fred was
sorry.
saying earlier of how they made it. They could have kept it separate because in the book, Gandalf's just like, gotta go to a meeting, goes to the meeting. Bunch of stuff happens that we never hear back from him about, and then he just appears again. He's just like, come on, give me my burglar back, you know. But they had to include that, so she's not in the book, but she is in the movie, and it makes sense. So, yeah.
Got it. Okay. And then obviously Ian McKellen back as Gandalf.
Mm-hmm.
Impeccable casting. And then we have, I mean, the rest of the dwarves. Do I go through every one of them? I mean,
It's a lot of like people who have TV shows in England. Like it's got the Poldark guy in there. It's got, I mean, now he's famous, but Lee Pace is the one elf in the later ones. Like at the time,
Elf
it
King,
was
right.
people just like simmering about to get started. But now there's a lot of people who've got good careers now and of the dwarfs.
Yeah, some of them had like were pretty well known. You make a good point about like big BBC stars. Like there were some of the older dwarves I know were doing were pretty big, and they were the smaller parts like Owen and which also Owen or Owen. Glowin or glowing. I've heard it both ways. I kind of like glowing
yeah.
and Owen.
Yeah,
It's
Glowin
kind of
and Owen. I love
glowing and Owen.
That is
but-
fun, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the one notable here that I noted was Graham McTavish because he's kind of had a pretty good run here recently.
Is he the werebear?
He's no. Wait, is he? I don't know.
I'm asking. I don't know.
Which one's the werebear?
I just heard that name and I didn't know it was that one of the dwarves.
Graham McTavish plays Dwalin.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
And he's a super emotional guy. The behind the scenes is a lot of him being just like really upset that people have to leave.
Do you have a picture of him?
Yeah, I'll pull him up.
Kinda
With
What?
the bald with the bald on the top.
He's
and
a
hair on the
very
side.
bald, intense guy.
Ah.
First dwarf that appears, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, you'll remember him if you've watched a lot of like big TV shows recently. He's in House of the Dragon. He's in The Witcher. He is in he's a voice in DuckTales, which is hilarious.
Whoa.
Where's the meat? that's his thing.
Fergus McDuck. I don't know.
Oh, he's Fergus.
I have not watched that one, so I don't know much about it. But yes, I mean you have, and then obviously we talked about Benedict Cumberbatch, who is the voice of Smug. So, and then we had Orlando Bloom back as Legolas, so I know was added to the movie because I remember reading about
With
that.
contacts.
Oh, that's right.
His eyes are different, and that's the other thing I don't like. but when elves are younger, their eyes have more glow. I thought that's what you were gonna say. It was gonna be like the dwarf and the heat thing.
I looked at it recently. I watched specifically to see, wait a minute, because I always noticed like in the Hobbits, like, yeah, they are very bright now. And then I went back, I was like, no, they just emphasized it more. They were always that color. But I always thought that they were darker, but it's like, oh, maybe he was just always in the dark and his pupils were bigger. I don't know. It was just-
Maybe. That was the first thing I noticed when I watched these movies, and he came on. I was like, whoa, he glowy.
And then we have this whole side plot too with Evangeline Lilly is in the movie as like another elf, and her name is Toriel.
Tariel, yeah.
Tariel, I'm sorry. And she's like got the hots for the one like hot dwarf, isn't it Killy or
The guy from the Poldark show. That's all I remember. And he was on Being Human, the BBC version.
is it let me see. Not Aidan Turner then,
Yep,
right?
Aidan Turner, because he plays young Sam Elliott in The Man Who Killed Hitler and then would go on to kill Bigfoot, I think is the name of the
Oh,
movie.
really?
Whoa.
That's
God,
the
it's a
title.
great name for a movie.
And if you look at him, you can kind of see him playing a young Sam Neill. Like they make him look like it's weird. At first you're like, no, and then you're like, oh, wow.
I think obviously then Hugo Weaving and Christopher Lee are back playing Elrond, Saruman. Ian Holm is old Bilbo, which I mean I don't want to show my hand for coulda, woulda, shoulda, but man, I would have loved to see him as young Bilbo in like an older like live action Hobbit.
I thought you could say like do like an Irishman thing for the whole movie. They just put Ian Holm in makeup or whatever, and just have him be young Bilbo. I love that.
Gosh.
But then we also have Luke Evans as Bard, who's the guy who shoots Smaug, and
What a hottie.
yeah, who also is Gaston in Beauty and the Beast. If you saw the live action one,
I love Luke Evans and Ma.
like the one with Octavia Spencer.
Yep.
He's in that.
Yep.
God, it's incredible.
And he has, I believe he has a romance scene with Octavia Spencer in it.
Wow.
But
Ma.
in terms of someone who really like showed their mettle on the movies, Luke Evans.
Yeah.
He did all of his own stunts And when he, well, like the vast majority of it, because they'd be like, would it be easier if I'll just do it. And they did, like when he's trying to fire an arrow or two into Smaug and he's jumping over the rooftops. They had him do that over and over and over, and he showed his hands at the end, and he was bleeding from all of that. And he was just like, and all the stuntmen apparently came to him afterwards, and they all like took him out that night, and they were all like if you get the stuntmen, like if you get their respect, that's something. But that's one of those things where it's like, oh, you don't just look good, you are good.
Yeah.
Good for you, Luke.
Yeah. But he's a strong part of those of 2 and 3.
Yeah. I think he's a really good part. And it is funny to see just like how little that part is in like the Rankin Bass. And you're like, oh, okay, that guy's just like
he's just a generic guy.
Yeah.
I feel, in the Rankin Bass.
He's like,
there's like six of him in the same crowd.
my color has not laid me down. Let me give it a shot.
You, not human. Like,
and I'm pretty sure Stephen Fry is like the underground Goblin King, and he's the like head of Lake Town. No, he's
not the Goblin King. He's just the master.
Goblin King is a guy, though.
It is
the Goblin King.
The Goblin King is a guy, and that is in context. That makes sense.
I'm glad you knew, because I say, who
isn't Goblin King the same guy as Dex from the Clone War, from Attack of the Clones, that Obi-Wan goes to visit in the diner? Yeah.
Ooh,
isn't that the same guy?
Do you guys? So
I thought you were gonna ask, do we want to know? So
yes.
I mean, okay. So the correct answer, right? So he's the Great Goblin, right? That's his title in the movies.
He's got the neck ball.
Yeah. He is Barry Humphries is his name. He is. So you thought he is in Star Wars?
Yeah, he's in at least
Dexter
one
Jetster.
of them. Either Dexter Jetster or Dexter Jetster and the King of the Gungans.
The guy. That would, I think it might be that guy.
That might be him, yeah.
Okay, let me make sure that he's not. There's not another role that's not.
In my other
the planet core.
Usa, Dinken Usa Gresa than the Gungans. He just let
So
some.
you guys are thinking of Brian Blessed?
That was Brian Blessed.
But I don't see him with a credit in Lord or The Hobbit here.
Not Dex. It's not him. It would be then the guy who plays Dexter Jetster.
That's what I think. We're gonna be right about something.
Guys, I'm trying to look through this. I'm not seeing the connections.
Man, maybe they just look similar.
Maybe it was Stephen Fry.
Telling y'all, I think it was this other cat. I can't remember his name anymore. But regardless, I mean, it's a very interesting point. He's got the big ball on his fucking neck. I mean, yeah, they're crediting the Great Goblin as Barry Humphries, who is known, I don't know, Bruce in Finding Nemo.
Oh, that's what it is. He is the guy who is rich as hell.
But I mean, and it's interesting because I think, not to say critics know everything or do anything, but I think you are going to find different opinions from, a lot of different people on what they thought of these movies. And critics, I think, were a little lukewarm on the whole trilogy because I think they weren't people who necessarily had read The Hobbit and knew every little piece. But I guess I don't know. You have people who are precious about that story. You have people who are very precious about making the world as expansive as possible. You can't please everybody. And it's like, so I think it's considering the time that Jackson was given, I think they put together something that was still entertaining. I think you look at it, I don't know that I would hold it up to Lord of the Rings as like the same quality, but I think the endeavor was definitely something to be appreciative of. And I mean, I think it's the only thing for me that is ever holding me back from revisiting those. I'm like, it's the same thing that holds me back. And that's just my level of fandom of Lord of the Rings. I don't go and seek those out and spend 3.5 hours with, a movie on a given day. If I'm watching 3.5 hours of a movie, I need to like gear up and be like, I'm starting this at 4 p.m. I got plenty of bathroom breaks, dinner break. That was how I did Killers of the Flower Moon recently, which we'll be talking about soon. But yeah, I guess any other thoughts on the movies before we move on to our Coulda, Woulda, Shoulda segment?
I want to share the story of why I actually love the movies.
Yes.
Specifically because it has a kind of a nostalgic and purposeful story behind it for me.
Please
So,
share.
thank you. So when Allison and I were in college, so we were both went to St. Norbert College up in De Pere, Wisconsin, and it was from 2010 to 2014 when we were there, and that was obviously when these movies were coming out, and every time that they would come out, they'd come out around December, right? And so it would be Allison's birthday, December 17th, and so we would then be back home. Usually after the first couple of years of college, which we were almost always up there, but then we'd be back home for winter break, and it might be a little bit longer. You usually get about a month off for winter break at St. Norbert. And so we would, or like 2 or 3 weeks. And during that time, we'd be down south, and there'd always be a blizzard. There'd always be snow, but it would be her birthday. And I'm like, Allison was not a big fan of movies, going to the movie theaters or whatever. She was fine watching them, but she never really had like a really good cinematic experience with anything.
Sure.
And so I was like, you love Lord of the Rings. She's like, I do. So let's do this. And so I would bring her out to dinner, and then the two of us would then go see that movie, and then we'd go home. And we did it with the first one. We did it with Desolation of Smog. We did it with Battle of Five Armies. And each and every one of those times, blizzard, dinner, movie, blizzard, home. It was the exact same. All 3 movies.
That's wild.
And every single time it was like, she would be like, is that really what we're doing again? I'm like, yes. And then she'd be like, oh, all right. And then we do it again. And she'd be like, that was pretty good. And then we do it the third time. And she's like, okay, that was impressive. That was a really good movie. And then, and then as the years went on, it just became another one of those things where it was like, it had this connection to our relationship and to our collective and joint knowledge of the series.
Yeah.
And it always had the same feeling of when I watch those movies, I think of the drive home, in a blizzard at like midnight from a late showing of one of those movies. And since then, I've also learned that aside from the first time that you watch a movie, which you should try and watch it from start to finish if you can, in whatever the environment is that makes sense to you, but it helps you kind of see it the way that the filmmaker has laid it all out. But I've learned since then that with all of these movies, especially the epics that are particularly long, just watch as much as you're comfortable watching in a sitting, and then turn it off, and then come back exactly where you were. Because you won't end it not on a beat. You'll always end it on one of those beats where it's like, that makes sense, because that's how the story is told anyway. And that way you can watch the extended editions of The Lord of the Rings an hour and a half at a time at the most. Like you were saying, these would be better if they were an hour and 45 minutes each. That has actually become what I've evolved into in terms of my watching of it. I never watched the whole movie on its own. It's another one of the ways that I combat, falling asleep during smog is that, nope, I'm just going to wait until, all right, they got there. Wonderful. Tomorrow I'm watching that. And then it doesn't happen.
That's
and
great.
that's not what I'm fighting, but it is quite literally, I'm able to focus on everything. I'm able to actually like pay attention to all the detail. Cause if there's one thing that all of these movies have, it is that immense, like the grandiosity of the endeavor that the filmmakers took to make it was just huge. And it's like, you were saying earlier, they don't compare to The Lord of the Rings. It's like, yeah, you're right. They don't. That's like peak cinema. And these are also very entertaining, which should be said, but you can't really compare the two, but you can compare them, but you shouldn't,
right.
But you can because they did it. And I enjoy it.
I mean, and it's a beautiful story, first and foremost. I love that you have this attachment of like this shared memory experience of like, oh yeah, my wife and I did this, she was your wife at the time, but it's like, oh yeah, this was always our repetitive event. And there's always this significance to each of those things. But yeah, I also think like, and just speaking to the differentiations between the prequels and the originals, I mean, it's very Star Wars, right? It's like, I mean, nobody's going to tell you the prequel trilogy. I think the Hobbit trilogy is a little bit better than the Star Wars prequels, but I think, it's kind of that same almost kind of thing of like, there's still reverence for the prequels and they're still fun to watch, especially now. I mean, they've aged a little differently, but we're a totally different story. And I think in the same way, like I said, I have a better appreciation. I think I would actually enjoy these Hobbit movies more now, having ingrained myself more in the lore of Middle Earth. But yeah. Should we kind of get into our coulda, woulda, shoulda then, and maybe talk a little bit about what Del Toro's vision could have looked like? Because while I rarely be like, oh, here, I'm going to offer one right out the gate. I mean, this is the obvious sliding door here.
Right.
You know, what does Del Toro's version look like? How is it different? I mean, what do we feel like he could have brought differently?
As you said earlier, I'm going to bring this back. More colors. And then also the color drained from parts also. So much more drained and monotone at parts. Basically more saturation, whether that means the colors become more colorful and the dim areas become much darker. I feel like that accentuation of the feelings and the moods of all of the different parts of the story is what we would see. And also probably a little bit more of a seriousness at parts instead of like, because obviously the dwarves were able to fight through all those different situations in very outlandish ways that still works with the story and what we know about Tolkien. But I feel like Guillermo might have made it more pointed.
Less whimsy.
Less whimsy, more dumb luck, which would have also, I think, translated a little bit more to the dangers that they were facing. Because it was there, but it was almost like you had to be reminded of it consistently. Whereas with Guillermo, I feel like he probably wouldn't have shown so many of the goblins. We'd see eyes in the dark. We wouldn't see their whole shape all the time. That's at least kind of how I would feel it would be.
Well, it's going to be hard because a lot of the prosthetic characters are like smaller, like Gollum. So Doug Jones is going to be having a hard time finding a role in this movie. Like, Dougie, baby, you're too tall for this one. But he could have played the orc then, maybe. That's all I would have said. Doug Jones would have had a big role in it, which I'm pro Doug Jones. I think because Guillermo uses CG, but he uses it to accentuate his practical effects. I think we would have gotten some really cool creature design. Like, I would have loved to see what his spiders would have looked like. Or like if he would have done the wood elves in the way that how did you describe them? Banana.
Tinkerbell with banana, a little bit of green giant. Yeah.
I think I would have hoped we would have gotten more of that, but also in reality, it sounded like you said that he wasn't a big Hobbit fan. He liked the Lord of the Rings movies. Maybe he would have felt he had to put himself into that mold more. So maybe his vision wouldn't have been when you think a Guillermo del Toro Hobbit movie. Like, I think images pop in your head. I don't necessarily know if he would have gotten to make that movie.
Yeah.
But that's my coulda, woulda, shoulda. I want his loosely attached to the trilogy Hobbit movie. I'll take a trilogy, like I said, just tighten them up and then make your what happened before, like what kicked off Lord of the Rings movie. Make that a separate thing. And you can kind of have fun playing it that they're at the same time. But I just want it to feel more different.
Right. Because, I think you hit on something exactly that would have been my concern, too. Knowing that this comes after Lord of the Rings, would there have been the pressure to maintain some of that vision that was already established by Jackson? And we kind of talked about it at the start. Like, this whole thing got tanked because studios are petty. And like they if you're gonna make a movie, you're gonna make it with us, or we're gonna have the ownership rights. Like and like, of course, there's always the Hollywood of it all, of like what would have happened had even Guillermo del Toro gotten his hands on it back in like 1997, previous to creating the Lord of the Rings trilogy, right? Like, okay, I'm gonna make my Hobbit movie now. I mean, it wouldn't have worked this way because obviously he was inspired by Peter Jackson, but you imagine something of like 1997, 1999, we're talking like Blade 2 era, Guillermo del Toro making The Hobbit, and then that sets the stage for Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy. And then you get, I think, two very unique visions, because then Peter Jackson can kind of still cook a little bit without necessarily needing to like he's like, okay, but we're going to kind of just make this more epic and not have to be as kind of dark fantasy. Because I think the cautionary tale of having a Guillermo del Toro led movie where it seems like it's a very famous fantasy story, I remember Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland was going to be like the thing. People are like, this guy was born to make this movie. The movie blew. I remember being so amped to see that.
Oh, so many basements in high school where we talked about, man, Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland. It's gonna like be scary. Like,
Right.
It's not gonna be for kids, man. And then you saw it, and I was like, it's not for kids. It's not for anyone.
Yeah. Because again, I think a trap that he's fallen into, and something that we kind of touched on even with Peter Jackson with The Hobbit, is like the love and this like leaning on CGI. I think you lose something when you are trying to over CGI something. And I think there's a reason the Lord of the Rings hits so much harder because of those practical effects, the forced perspective rather than trying to like minimize somebody on screen. I'm not saying they did that in The Hobbit. I don't think they did. I think they did the same shit that they did.
Yeah, they did. They did a lot of the same exact
Right.
force perspective. Yeah.
And like that makes such a difference because it feels more real.
Well, we know these were made differently because there was that famous picture of Ian McKellen on the set of The Hobbit where he had a breakdown because he was just surrounded by tennis balls and he was like, this is not what I came back for. You know, like
it was like day 1 or 2 and he genuinely like he had to have a talk with Peter, and Peter was just like they realized as he was doing it that he just could not focus because it was like this is not what I want to do. And he was very kind about it, but you could tell it's like for an English like superior actor to be like, Peter, it's just, I don't think it's working. You'd be like, oh my God, he's screaming. And they actually had some of the people in the production go make up a tent for him with vinyl records and carpets and nice seats. So that was all like very like 60s retro, just so that he could have a place to go and decompress and understood that they appreciated what he was doing and that it was like very, not what he was expecting,
Yeah.
And it's a different process. It changes everything.
Yeah,
Right?
It does. I think it's a whole bigger conversation than what we even are talking about right now. Is just, I think the backing off of CGI is really what I want to see. The way that Guillermo del Toro likes to deploy it. It's a way, or even Christopher Nolan likes to do it. It can accentuate an environment. It's not meant to build the environment,
Yeah, it feels like maybe it wasn't like a money thing. It was like you said, it was a rush production. Maybe it was just like, and then we'll fill it in later. That was the idea. And then it was like,
Right.
There was.
So I think that's obviously a big sliding door, but what else would you guys have liked to have seen in any other capacity involving The Hobbit? Now the board is wide open.
On it, kind of going off something you were saying earlier about how Guillermo he wasn't a big fan. I like that because it to me it rings very true to like Irving Kershner and The Empire Strikes Back, because he was like, you want to make a movie? And they're all just like, yes. Did you see the first one? He's like, yeah, I guess I'll watch it. And then, it was someone who didn't really care about it as much as he was just like, I want it to be good. And that was how he saw it. He was very objective based. And I feel like that would be an amazing advantage that Guillermo would have had. Although I wouldn't want to see any version of The Hobbit live action before The Lord of the Rings, because it would be like if you were doing like a series of like charcoal drawings and you were starting with a white canvas versus starting with a mid-tone canvas. Because the mid-tone then gives you all of the lighter colors as well as all of the darker colors, and you can work your way from wherever you want. But if you start with just a plain white canvas, you can only go darker. And I feel like The Hobbit really benefited, but The Lord of the Rings itself was, in the Tolkien's universe, that was the thing. So it only made sense that would be the big thing that they worked their way up to. But
Sure.
They did it across 3 movies, not across multiple series. And I thought that they lucked out. It was one of those like very circumstantial, we don't have the rights to this. Let's just do this one. And it was like, okay, I guess they fell right into it. Whereas it just, I don't know. I'm just like, in every different version of how does The Hobbit work if it came first, or if someone else made it, I think in every rendition, the source material will make a good product, but they'll all be so different.
Yeah.
And that was probably also to go on what you were saying, Fred, is that you can't make a Hobbit made by the same person as made the first 3 movies actually be like an entirely different project. It was just not possible. And
Right.
also not really Peter Jackson's fault, because he
No.
went years thinking, oh, thank goodness I don't have to do that. And then all of a sudden then health problems, then, pushing it back another
Yeah.
year and all those things. And I don't know. What else would we want to change about it?
I mean, it can be anything. You can reimagine anything, and that's why I kind of like the idea of like the Hobbit, because like I think something else I even touched on before. Like I would have loved to have seen an Ian Holm led Hobbit movie, like, but maybe in his younger years. Which again, it's a whole problem of the time frames for this, and it's like whenever they were prepared to do something like this. Although, wasn't there a whole thing that I can't remember if we talked about this in the Lord of the Rings episodes where the Beatles wanted to make Return of the King?
That was gonna be Kubrick was gonna do the Lord of the Rings, and he wanted to cast the Beatles.
Which is incredible. Like, of all the ultimate unmade projects, a Kubrick, he would have broken.
Yeah, but it would be Samwise, because no one's given off Sam energy. Maybe Ringo, I guess.
Oh, Ringo for sure.
So it'd be
Ringo's real
Ringo
life
and
Sam.
Paul.
Well, actually, no. Or is Ringo
Because
more?
I think he wanted George
Pippin.
maybe to be Gollum or something. Maybe that's who I would cast as Gollum.
Yeah.
It's precious to me.
Ringo would be a surprisingly good Sam, though, because in the Beatles, he was the Sam of the Beatles.
Right.
Like, he was amazing. Like it was the Peter Jackson documentary that I was just like, Ringo's amazing. What
Yeah.
a great guy. He's always there. He's always friendly.
Yeah.
You guys are writing songs. Well, I wrote one too.
Can I put a beat on that? Will you do what I did? Yeah, all right. All right.
Oh, God, or yeah, John Lennon would have been the Pippin, right? Like he had to have been. Just, the fuck off or whatever. Like, well, I'm off doing this now. I've had a breakfast. What about second breakfast?
Where's Mary?
But you know what? They would have been so broken by the first hour because it would have been Kubrick doing this movie.
Oh,
And he would have had Paul
wouldn't have
McCartney would have been had his. We would have been on the second Paul McCartney by that point, playing Frodo in the Two Towers.
McCartney's all the way down.
It's the fake Paul. It's Frodo. But yeah, I don't know. I try to think though of like that time and doing the Hobbit. Like God, there'd been something fun in the 80s, right? Like. You get, I can't remember who directed the Never-Ending Story, but just something that felt like that. That
I
could,
would love that.
you know? Or what's another like famous like 80s fantasy?
The Warriors of Virtue.
What? What is that?
That's the one with like the kangaroo ninjas.
I love how the specificity is beautiful. I love it. I have to watch a lot of movies when I go home. I really do.
With
Warriors of
Virtue.
What about the unicorn?
I will say, oh yeah, no. Yeah, you're
I
right.
gotta start there.
Because you want to hear those tasty America jams.
I do. I
I
really do. I know they are too.
Oh my God.
I will say real quick.
Doug Jones in the Warriors of Virtue.
I believe it. He's probably the kangaroo. He needs someone tall. But I would say, Guillermo del Toro just released an extremely beautiful stop motion movie, the Pinocchio movie.
Mm-hmm.
I think that could be cool at this point. Just have him do like a stop motion, like slightly darker but more children's focus with lots of music, animated movie. Kind of do Rankin Bass, but your own Rankin Bass.
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
That could be a lot of fun, actually.
That would be really neat.
And that was kind of to the point I even had before of like making like a CGI movie, but actually I kind of love that even more of doing like that stop motion animation of Lord of the Rings, because it does feel like that has sort of that 60s, 70s aesthetic to it without necessarily being, from that era. It just, I don't know.
Yeah, stop motion comes with texture.
Yes.
And I think the texture is what Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit needs.
Mhm.
So that perfectly fits. Can I add a thing that I would change?
You sure can.
Beorn's cottage in The Hobbit, who is the guy, Beorn, the dude who can become he's a changeling.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
That was like the best part of the book. it was so detailed and it made you hungry, but you also like really respected Beorn because I feel in the movies they kind of like skipped over him a little bit, where they're just like he's a victim, he's the last one alive, and he's just like, yeah, I know I'm sorry to have been hunting you basically for a while recently, but I just I don't trust people. And it was quite literally Gandalf the entire time playing this game, because all of the dwarves were not in the house right away. They basically like went around back, and he told them, just because he doesn't really like dwarves, you don't want to freak him out, come in twos. Bomber, you're last. And Bomber's like, what? And Bomber was a kind of a dick in the book all the time. The big one, he was always a jerk, and they're just like, Bomber, and he's just like, I'm sick of this. And so they're all just waiting, and two at a time, every like 5 minutes or something, they would come in just so that Gandalf could be like, so this is where we're going, Beorn. Oh, hey, it's these two. Don't worry, it's just these two. And he's like, there's more. Okay, anyway. And he'd still be entertained by whatever Gandalf was telling him. And as they're still talking, just another two would come, and he'd just be like, no, just keep listening to what we're talking about. And they kept trying to distract him. And then Bomber just got tired of it, and so he just went with another group. So there was three of them, and Beorn's like, okay, what's happening? And because Gandalf was like, if he gets mad, he's gonna kill all of us because he's gonna change into the monster. And so there was that like tension building, and that was not in the like they kind of used up all the tension in the movie with, oh, get in, he's after us, and it's like, get into his house, that'll be safe,
I would have liked that, because that's a classic scene of some Gandalf bullshit. Gandalf's always on some bullshit.
Yes.
And I just want someone to call him out.
Well, it's one of those things that I loved about Gandalf, that everyone says the elves are the only ones that will always report to the hobbits of like, remember, don't meddle in the wizard's business. They are subtle, and they're quick to anger. And that is very true. And by the subtlety, I think that's exactly what it was. It's like, it's frustratingly subtle at times. It's like, are you just fucking with me, Gandalf? It's like, yes, but for good reason. And it's been 1,500 years in the making. Don't mess this up. And that's all he's thinking. So I would love
don't
that
call
scene.
him out, because he gets mad.
Yeah, don't.
I am not a conjurer of cheap tricks.
Stupidity. It's just a lot of that. I would like that. I would change that, I think.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Should we get into some of our favorite moments then from these movies?
Sure.
As our power rankings for the week? I'm just trying to build on the segue without necessarily putting a pin in that, but I think this could be a very fun way to kind of get into it, because I think you describing that, I'm like, that's a moment from that movie that I don't really recall. I don't even know if that's in the Rankin Bass, to be honest. Is it?
I think it is. No, the two dwarves at a time coming in. I think it is.
I don't know. I was half paying attention today.
I'm pretty sure at the Rankin Bass they do kind of that, like an expedited version.
It's like a part of the montage where they're singing.
It is. Half of that movie is, and it's great.
And then the hobbits came and they left a hurry. The dwarves are a flurry. Everything's a rhyme. But yeah. So what are your favorite moments from The Hobbit, the story? And if you have a specific thing, like from the live action movies or from the animated movie that you want to call out, please go for that. CJ, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. I always enjoy, in any of the Tolkien movies, books, whatever it might be, the Shire. Bag End. Whatever happens in Hobbiton or Bag End, or on the way from the Shire through like the Breeland and all the other areas, before you get to the obviously dark places and the obviously, bureaucratically and politically complex areas. The Shire is just that perfect, very, very, very minutely worked out, like the themes, the place, the people. Everything is very, very well described in all of the books, in all of the movies. They take the time to say, yeah, we're talking about the pipeweed that they smoke. And we're going to talk about it a lot. We're going to talk, like, there's a whole chapter on Old Toby and the weed from the South Farthing and all those things. They very much lay that out, and it's just, it all does have an effect later on. And I feel like for The Hobbit, I'm a big fan of anything with the Shire because it just makes me feel comfortable, and it somehow interests me in something that I never thought I would be interested in.
Yeah.
It's not something that would grab me in any other context or any other time in my life. I feel like it's one of the very few things that the calmer it has, the calmness of that appeals to me the more mature I get, I think.
Yeah.
And it always gets better.
It's kind of like the Great British Bake Off tent,
Yes.
isn't it? That's like Hobbit vibes. And I would love like a travel channel show about hobbits, and just like today we're going to Maggie's farm. She collects carrots.
Yeah.
She has a party today. You know?
It is great that it's an actual location. Fred, did I tell my Hobbiton story on the Lord of the Rings
I think
episode?
you at least talked about going. I don't know if there was like a specific thing that happened.
I'll tell you again, CJ. And for any listeners who maybe missed Lord of the Rings episode, I'll relate it very quickly.
Yeah.
So I had the opportunity to go to New Zealand back in 2003 or 2004.
Sure.
So right after the trilogy wrapped. So Hobbiton is a real place in New Zealand now. Like they've kind of marked it where it's at. They have a big old sign that says, "Welcome to Hobbiton." So our tour bus rolled up to this city of Hobbiton, or town of Hobbiton, if you will. We're like, we're going to see the sets. We're going to see all the, where the hobbits, like the hovels and all that. You get to it, and it kind of looks like when you get into the downtown there or whatever, where the Hobbiton sign is, it looks kind of like an old West town in like Western U.S. Like you're in Deadwood. It's like there's like little shops and stuff you can walk into. And so we're all like taking pictures in front of the sign that says "Welcome to Hobbiton." Like everybody's taking their time, throwing up the peace sign and all that. I was like, awesome. All right, let's go see this. And they're like, okay, back on the bus. I'm like, here we go. They're like, we're on to our next destination, Rotorua. And I'm going, excuse me. Where's the set? They're like, oh, that's way off down the way. We're not seeing that. I was like, we came to see a sign? I was furious. I was like, this was one of the few, if not the only time in my life I'll ever be in New Zealand. I didn't even get to see the fucking set. I was so angry.
Did you see pictures of what it looked like when you were there?
I thought you were building up to, and I got there and there were no hobbits.
No, Fred. I didn't even know to get in to see any hobbits. I didn't even get to see any hobbit houses. I didn't even get to see the little pathway that Gandalf and Frodo are rolling through. Like,
It would have been just hills though.
I know, but
Because they didn't leave it all.
Listen, the other half of what of being in New Zealand, and I mean, obviously somewhere where The Hobbit was filmed, is like, yeah, they filmed all over. You can see like everywhere you're going is part of the set technically. So you've seen like the scenery, the rolling hills, and it is gorgeous. One of the most beautiful countries on earth. But like, I was just like, I wanted to see the sets that were left over, and they were fresh. I was like, oh, so angry.
Well, I thought the best business to open in that area is, you get a couple of drones, you get a couple of costumes, and this is the business. You come to my shop, I put you in Lord of the Rings garb, and then I just have you run through the wilderness. I'm a drone shoot you from above, and then I'm going to send you a cut of like Howard Shore score just pumping and you running in full costume across New Zealand.
That's really cool.
awesome.
I very much like that. And also, I have a theory. The people who did the tour never actually met or talked to the landowner.
Yeah,
So they could
I
only
believe
go
it.
up to the sign and then they had to drive away.
probably.
They took you for everything you had.
I know.
Man.
So sad. It was so sad. But I digress. Either way, good reason to go back or go to it for the first time if you guys ever have interest. Please continue with your ranking, CJ. As I just read that.
That's right.
That's what we're doing.
Oh my gosh, I forgot
So
about that.
Hobbiton.
No, I'm trying to yeah, I love the Shire. I love in terms of the book, Erebor itself and Dale, those were that area to me was always very it's interesting because it's a set that is built in the book very well and very it's somewhat ambiguous, but it's specific enough so that you can do with it as you need to, because in the Rankin Bass, it is one way, but it's similar to the way that it is in the Peter Jackson films.
Right.
But I would say that the best reference for that area for me is that it doesn't end at the Battle of Five Armies for me. So it has a lot of meaning because during the Lord of the Rings, there's a whole nother much larger battle that happens there with Dane and then King Bard of Dale at the time. And it's just one of those things where I like any time that you go to a place that's like, this existed way back then and it's gonna keep existing, this is just this part of it.
Yeah.
And so anything having to do with that area, the fields in front of Erebor, and anything having to do with the Shire, I absolutely enjoyed. And also I very much enjoy how the elves are completely different in every rendition. I like that because it means that, okay, there is an area in which people don't creatively agree, but everyone has some kind of a take on it. And all of them are still accurate to the story, but they don't have to match. And that kind of, I feel like that's very, that I enthusiastically accept that in, because that just speaks to the creative possibilities of new versions in the future that nobody has to watch if they don't want to, but can exist.
Yeah.
And that's good because that's how we got them in the first place.
It's true.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's very good. I enjoy it a lot. Fred?
I think my number one would be the behind the scenes footage of Benedict Cumberbatch doing the Smog, where he's like on the ground and doing the face. That's probably my favorite Hobbit thing. No, I just remember watching that video. I'm like, he's doing it. I'll count that as one. I really like the part in the Peter Jackson movies, the first one, where you do get like "That's What Bilbo Baggins Hates" song, but I do like when everything gets cleared up, they're all lighting their pipes, they're getting that nighttime drink, and is it Thorin?
Yep.
He's gonna lay down a fucking song,
Yeah.
and it's gonna be like it's gonna be a song. It's gonna be soulful. I'm gonna tell you about some stuff. I love that, and that's what I thought I was gonna really love these movies. I thought it was gonna be kind of like almost that surreal, like Zack Snyder-y thing where like now we're in like a weird music video, like, because that's the feel of like the first 20 minutes of that first movie, and it loses a little bit of that, whereas like the Lord of the Rings trilogy kind of starts grabbing at that at the end with Mary singing that song, kind of like these, like I feel that's very like the Zack Snyder thing, which like the good thing.
Yeah. Right.
And then I'm trying to think, of a story beat, I would say it's a tie between I love the riddles between Gollum and Bilbo, and like I said, the idea of Sting. I just think that's just a cool kid logic thing that just like, and it works in the later movies, just them unsheathing it and see that it's glowing. When in the Hobbit movies, Gollum kills the orc that falls down with Bilbo and he sees the sword go out. I think that's super cool.
That's
like
really neat.
we're playing with the logic of the sword. And so those are my three parts.
That's pretty good, though. Yeah.
I hadn't thought about the Sting part. I love that.
Yeah.
When it goes out, I was like, we haven't seen that before. We only ever see it go on. Right?
Yeah. And oh, man. Yeah. I think that's one of the cool things. I could even probably lift that as one of my moments, though, too. I love that. I mean, just the invention of like magical artifacts, because it's informed how many different things. I can name 20 off the top of my head, but it's like I think of like Dungeons and Dragons. How critical is it to get an artifact in that game? The idea of like, even in like the Final Fantasy games, it's like, oh yes, you need this specific sword like that can do this, and they're always named after something that's kind of like a nod to religion or something like that. And I also kind of love that in Lord of the Rings, like Sting and like everything is very like built into this world. It's not referencing anything. You talked about it, like he's not referencing like Norse mythology. I think is the closest thing you can see is like here's some inspiration for what we see, but with like Thorin and Thor, right? Like that's probably the closest relation you'll ever get. I actually knew a guy named Thorin in college. So.
Really?
Yeah. His
amazing.
parents were huge Hobbit fans. So.
Nice.
I know. So we did call him Thor a lot, but I do just love like, the idea of like the One Ring and like that, just everything about that whole thing. Because I think it's built such a lasting ideology around that whole like just mechanism or the MacGuffin of sorts, I think too is I love the moment of Bard shooting the dragon, specifically in the live action movie.
Yes.
I think that's the best way that Battle of Five Armies starts, is like you get to start it right with Smaug attacking Lake Town, and you get this like it starts on like this huge beat, and like what a way to end Desolation of Smog, right? Of like it's like, oh God, now he's gonna get to Lake Town, and like I could have done probably without a lot of the Legolas intervention, to be honest. That's maybe like my one other critique. I just didn't love how injected the elves were in all
I
this.
did like they'd be cutting off mad heads in that last movie. Like I just remember watching like so many beheadings.
At one point, they're like, Legolas needs to catch up. Let's have him fly upside down and just go down a whole
Right.
row of them.
But it's like then you had the Battle of Five Armies for these elves to fight. It's like, did we really need them involved in like this like Smog going after Lake Town? Like I think I was most invested in that movie of like Bard like trying to get this giant like crossbow to line it up, and like he's like, I gotta hit this one specific point.
And it was like his daddy failed at it, right?
Right.
So that's going through his mind.
Yeah, and it's like what a completion of that arc. I was like, I love that part of the story, and even in like the Rankin Bastards, I think it's a very abbreviated version of that. I like the epicness in Peter Jackson's vision of that one. And I think just the last thing I'll add is, I don't know, I kind of love just Gandalf coming at the beginning and just knocking on his door and being like, hey, you're in this party now. I don't know if you want it to be, but it's going to happen. And the fucking dwarves just start popping up. And in Rankin and Bass, there's something a little like unsettling about like, the way they just kind of slide up out of the bushes and shit. But I do love that too, even in the beginning. I think you talked about it, Fred. It's like the Zack Snyder music video idea of just these dudes just kind of coming in and turning his world upside down. And I'm like, this is how you start a story. Like, you don't need to spread this whole thing of like, oh yeah, I heard there's dwarves in town. Oh yeah, I saw this weird, strange wizard walking around or whatever. It's just like, nope, Gandalf's right at his door. Hey, wake up, motherfucker. We're going on an adventure.
I don't need Elijah Wood caked in makeup to look 5 years younger. Like he just looks weird in like that beginning part.
Yeah.
Like I didn't like them relying on that so much. Like,
Yeah.
we gotta have Frodo in it.
Yeah. I just like the way the actual like story starts though. And I think the book, animated, whatever you want to say, just the way that it's like Bilbo is thrown into this for the first like 2 pages. It's like, we don't need to spend a whole time. And like, yes, in the beginning of Lord of the Rings is great. You get the whole backstory of like, there were rings forged in fire once upon a time. Kate Blanchett, waxing poetic about this whole thing. But
Godfather theme plays.
Yeah.
there are 20 rings made. 7 for the dwarves.
That's really
And
good.
9.
I like to second in terms of favorite moments the taking like the black arrow being fired, because right now, because I have a 2-year-old son, Theo, I always cry.
Oh.
The last 2.5 years, I always cry at that scene. It was always emotional in the theater. I always loved it, but now it's like a boy, we're either gonna kill that dragon or we're gonna both die, and that's what we're doing today.
Real, it's real dad shit, and I love it.
It really is. It's like the most hardcore, like, this is what I'm here for kind of a thing.
Right,
And
yeah.
I've always just, I completely forgot about it.
Yeah.
To be honest, it's almost like a microcosm in my memory of that movie.
Yeah, and it's always just so interesting because I think coming into The Hobbit to begin with, and not to belabor more of this episode, we got to wrap this up, but I think it is interesting that you come into the last part of the story and you expect like Bilbo or one of the dwarves or Gandalf are gonna be the ones to defeat Smaug. It's like, it's a guy who had a lot of trauma. It's like, I'm gonna fucking end this thing, like. And it's like, but it was Bilbo who kind of tipped him off, right? He's like, let him know, like, yep, there's a weakness right here, dude, from your dad.
Yeah, and in the book, it was a bird that told Bard. It was a thrush.
Yeah,
The one that knocks.
Yeah, the one that knocks, comes by and gets on his shoulder while he's aiming.
So in the Rankin Bass, it's Bilbo who tells the thrush, who then goes and tells Bard.
Oh.
But is that how it actually happened in the book?
In the book, I know that Bilbo saw it and he basically confirmed it, and I think that the thrush might have been there to hear it, or the thrush was informed by the raven, because there was a raven who was like the king of the, because there's Ravenhill, and it's like a balding raven who's like 109 years old or something, and barely remembered like that the dwarves were there, but in Tolkien, crows are dicks, but ravens are great, and so the ravens can actually speak, and I love it because it's right at the end that they're just like, oh yeah, the raven's like, oh, it's been so good, and all the dwarves are like, the raven, and Bilbo's like, what is the bird talking, and the raven, I think, tells the thrush, or it's some like the thrush also gets that info and flies, and it's just like, because in the book it's just like, I thought I saw it die. Pretty sure I saw it die, and we learn way later that Bard's like, I killed it, or everyone. It's like a rumor, which is a much better way of slowly introducing that information, better than at the beginning of the movie, as you were saying. I think that was great because they included those elements in a much more appropriate and natural style. But I thought it was cool that it was the bird.
That would have been kind of dope to see at the beginning of The Hobbit. Like if you're gonna make a live action movie and seeing like the first attempt to try and slay Smaug. And like at Lake Town, that kind of, you just leave that as like a simmering memory of like, as you're kind of going through the movie, like, what was that about?
You have Luke Evans, but he's got like a mole here. So
Yeah.
it's his dad. I just watched Backdraft, and they do that for they do it for Kurt Russell. He plays his dad, and I'm like, it's Kurt Russell. How come he doesn't look like Adam Baldwin at all?
I forgot about that.
That's outstanding. Oh my God.
That's definitely his dad. He's more confident.
Oh gosh. All right. Well, I think that gets us to the end of our episode here,
Save
guys.
it for the Backdraft.
Yeah.
I would love the backdraft.
I saw it for the first time. It owns.
It's a great movie.
My parents had it on VHS. Yeah. Unbelievable. CJ, we really appreciate you being on, but before we let you go, is there anything you would like to plug?
What should I plug? Oh my goodness, there's a lot of different things that I would like to plug. Let's do the obvious ones. The Interchange Theater Co-op downtown in Milwaukee, right on Marquette's campus at the Calvary Presbyterian Church. It's in the basement, but the basement has 16-foot ceilings. So by all means, come there and see a show, because we do amazing long-form improv. I am the corporate education director there, so I run all of our traveling shows, curate our specialist workshops and things for corporations and businesses. And we also have a number of classes that are going on right now. As a matter of fact, I'm about to start the second session of musical improv. I have a musical improv intensive. That's a 4-week intensive that's going on. And at the end of the intensive, you perform 2 shows, actually, with an audience. So you get to headline on Friday and then open on Saturday for another bigger group. So that's always super fun. I would also plug my I'm also a musician, so I do a lot of things under the name The Siege Machine, one word, The Siege Machine, and actually I'm getting to the point where I'm about to release an album of video game music from a game called The Adventurer's Repose, which is a free game that you can play online, where you basically it's made by a friend of mine, Preston, in Australia, and he does it's basically a game where it's a magic tavern. So all these magical creatures are coming through and you wait their tables for them. And I am the band. So if you're in the game, all the songs, all the music, that's all myself. And then the instrumentation is Kevin MacLeod. And I did the arrangements and wrote all the songs and sang them all. And I'm now just making sure that they're all as perfectly mastered as I can, and they're very taverny and pub like music. They actually, more than a few of them would fit in the Shire, quite honestly.
Oh, that's fun.
And I'm very excited about that, because it's that and the interludes in between, but what the band says, like, if you could please, if someone owns 2 oxen, big brown fur, please report to the bar staff. A dragon has taken your livestock, like that kind of a thing. And then the songs, they're fantastic. And so that's going to be released soon. So keep an eye out for that on The Siege Machine on Spotify or wherever you listen to music. That's pretty much, those are the big ones.
Sounds great. What was the name of the game again?
That is The Adventurer's Repose. I would very much like to rename it, but that's okay. It's like the Magic Tavern game. I will be sure to share it with the 2 of you.
Yeah. Any sort of links or anything you want to send to us?
Yes.
We will promote.
I will send you those. And it's free. So you can just enjoy that for free, and then the music will be out and available for everyone. So Thank you so much. And I had an absolute blast. This was very nice to be able to talk about this, and in the format that you guys have. I very much appreciate that, because we were able to go through everything that we liked, the things that we didn't necessarily like, all of the things that really make for a good conversation about such a massive, undertaking as to talk about anything Tolkien.
Yeah, I know, for sure.
Yeah, we left probably a lot undiscussed, but I don't feel that way.
No.
No.
So I feel good about it.
And it was great. I think we set a new record for our time, but that's okay because I feel like this was sort of, in a way, not a redo, but I think it was an extension and where we really got to dive into Tolkien. Had somebody who was really great with UCJ to offer so much information too on just the story and the insights and the love for it because that's what makes this franchise podcast go round.
Thank you.
Fred, anything you want to plug before we go?
No, I think I'm just going to let you plug the podcast. You know, I think that's what we've been working on recently.
Yeah.
We've got some stuff coming up that's exciting.
We do indeed. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Threads. We are State of the Franchise with Fred and Tom. And you can also find our link tree in the description of this episode. You can find all of our resources, email stateofthefranchisepodcast@gmail.com. Also, we have a tip jar on there if you want to leave us a donation to help us keep the show going. That would be appreciated. But really, it's your listens that matter the most to us. And it's everything that we do here that I think that keeps us coming back and having awesome conversations about The Hobbit and Tolkien and talking with awesome people like CJ. So thank you so much again for being here, CJ. And thank you all for listening. And we will see you next time where we'll be discussing the best movies of 2023. Should be a great one. We'll see you then.
Goodbye.
All I wanna do is charge my phone, drive, listen